Good evening, everybody. 7 o'clock, so we will kick off. So the first thing I want to say is this is on Teams, and if you are not speaking, could you turn off your camera, please? And microphone. Thank you. Okay, so carrying on straight in. So apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies submitted from councillors Laura Blumenthal and Chris Johnson. They'll be being substituted tonight by councillors Anne Chadwick and Adrian Mather. And Councillor Gregor Murray will be attending on Teams this evening, which will mean he's not able to vote.
Okay, Gregor, when you're on the Teams, if you could raise your hand to ask questions, that'd be great. Thank you. Declarations of interest? Oh, no declarations of interest. Okay, public question times. Do we have any public questions?
None received.
Member questions?
None received.
Received. Right, so we can move on to the first agenda item, which is the cost of living crisis response. Had a request from Stephen to give a quick talk. So, Stephen, if you go ahead.
Just to introduce the item, if I may, from perhaps a broader context of partnership working. I think what we're going to hear about today is a wonderful example of partnership working. And it's one we hope to build upon and extend into other areas in which the council interacts with partners, external partners. But in the spirit of partnership, I'd also like to say that partnerships within the council are important. And here I'm hoping that this item will be treated as an opportunity by members of this Overview and Scrutiny Committee, not simply to ask questions, but to make suggestions and contribute to the way we develop the cost of living crisis response. So we're hoping that you will engage in a very positive way with this item and come up with suggestions that you might have, as well as simply ask questions. And I also, before I just hand over to the people who've been doing the real donkey work and the hard work, our colleagues in the Hardship Alliance, and we've got Jake and Emma here this evening. They're part of the Hardship Alliance, as the council is, and Rachel will also be speaking to you. And we're going to have a presentation from Mark Gwynn, who's up there in the ether at the moment. Before I hand over to others, I just really want to say a very, very big thank you to everyone who is involved both in the Hardship Alliance and beyond it, who is doing work to help our residents in what for many is a very, very difficult time. We know there are lots of people falling into hardship who have never fallen into hardship before, and the help they're being given by a great army of volunteers giving up of their time and efforts is truly wonderful. So a big heartfelt thanks to all of the people who work with and for all of the charitable bodies in the Hardship Alliance and beyond that. So that's enough for me, I think.
So thanks ever so much, Stephen. So we've been discussing this since the summer. It was quite clear already by the middle of the summer that this was going to be a very tough winter indeed. And we held our first meeting to start discussing this between the voluntary and the community sector. So both the members of the Hardship Alliance and what is now the Hardship Alliance Action Group, we met in Wokingham Town Hall to start discussing what our response was going to be. And I would like to add my thanks to Stephen, to all of the members of both groups who have participated in this. We do intend to work very closely together during what's likely to be an extremely difficult time for a lot of our residents. And I will hand over in a minute to Mark, who will talk through the detail of this. But we're looking at helping people with food, with keeping warm during the winter, and with also the other impacts which people are likely to see, such as impacts on mental health, problems with isolation, And I will hand over now to Mark, who will take us through some of the detail of that.
Hopefully that is coming through there almost.
It is, yes.
So as a hardship alliance,
Mark, could you put it in presentation mode? Thank you.
oh, sorry, I was trying to go in. There we go. Is that it now?
Yeah, that's
Great,
perfect.
got
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, so as a hardship alliance, we came together in January to start addressing the tackling poverty strategy and scoping that. So we were well placed when the cost of living crisis started to develop to expand the role into supporting this. So where we are now, we've seen over the last month that inflation, or the last weeks, that inflation's really high. It's continuing to rise. The energy cap was set at £2,500 for a couple of years. That's now looking like it's only going to be for 6 months. So lack of clarity around what's happening with that. Interest rates continuing to rise. Some slight signs today that maybe that's not going to rise as high as it was projected to go before, but it's very early to see exactly how high it's going to go. But that's putting a lot of pressure on people with mortgages and therefore also on private sector rents. Fuel and food, petrol, energy costs said rising, and then with winter coming, increased pressure on health and social care. So we could see all of these things coming. So we therefore started planning and thinking, what are we going to do to address this? So as working with the Hardship Alliance, we've developed a community-led response. So very closely working with Citizens Advice, Working United Charities, Age UK, First Days, and the Food Bank on the Hardship Alliance, as well as Rachel said, the Hardship Alliance Action Group, which widens out to much more of the voluntary sector dealing with and supporting people in hardship. So we've got a good partnership engagement there, and that enables us to really think about how we best deliver across everybody's skill sets and everybody's areas of work. And then I think the point here about innovation, and there are financial constraints. When COVID came along, a lot of extra money was put at the council and others to help address that. We're not seeing the same with the cost of living crisis, and therefore we've got to look innovatively at how we manage to fund the work that we're needing to do with council resources, with VCS resources, and raising money through things such as crowdfunding and asking others to help out. What we've done so far is we've created 7 work streams there. Each work stream to address the cost of living crisis is being driven by a member of the Hardship Alliance, who's named there, along with an assistant director from the council, or sometimes more than one, to pick up on that. So those are the 7 work streams that all come together, and we've got a bit more on each of those and some of the things that we're thinking about doing and planning on doing at the moment. What we're hoping today is to be able to get some thoughts from members around other things that we could be doing, some other ideas that you've got, innovative approaches, and how we can develop our approach as we roll it out over the coming months. So the needs-led approach, I'm not going to talk about everything you see on this slides here, just give you an overview of what each of these is about. So then there's plenty of time for a contribution, for discussion and questions. So we make best use of the time that Jake and Emma have given to coming along tonight as well. So the universal approach is part of the offer here. So looking at something that's openly accessible to everybody, and then a much more targeted approach, which is really looking at those that's in most risk and most vulnerable in the cohorts there. And this aspect ties in very much with the work that public health and adult social care are doing, as well as picking up people with mental health, housing issues, and those sorts of aspects. So we've got two different aspects of the approach there that are being developed, depending on how people are being impacted by the cost of living crisis. Funding, we've looked at what funding we've got available, so bringing in things like the Household Support Fund and how we can use that to help with the approach. What actual one-off funding we've got that we can earmark for this, and then looking at how we engage with town and parish councils, how they're able to support with funding or help others access the funding that's required to do that, and looking at opportunities such as crowdfunding, linking with the business community and businesses that are able to support and wanting to support with the work that we're doing, and trying to take innovative and different approaches there to try and bring in the fund that we've got, recognising that the council doesn't have lots of money to put out this, so it's about being efficient with what we're doing. People-based resources, so here we're very much thinking about how we train existing staff in other areas which can help people out, such as library staff to support an income maximisation, how we are able to divert some of the resources that we've got, such as our community-based staff, to help out further, how we support our communications, and then looking at how we also get volunteers, so people that aren't able to contribute time, aren't able to contribute money, but can contribute time, how they can volunteer to help out, whether that's in warm hubs, whether that's in food banks, or helping to transport some of the things that we're going to need to be able to provide. Then we're exploring other ways of increasing capacity, such as linking in with Asylum Hotel for residents there who want to volunteer. So widening out the resource that we've got to be able to help with this and bolster capacity within the voluntary and community sector, recognising that there's going to be increasing demand and therefore greater capacity needed. The logistics is main aspects of this are about our accommodation. You work out where we can have warm hubs, where we can store supplies that are needed and make the best use of that, how we can create a community offer that's accessible to different people in different areas of the borough, and really think about what's the offer that people have got. So we're not just opening a place and calling it a warm bank. What we're doing is we're thinking about what activity can be put on, how best that can be delivered, and then why people are going to want to go along there. And that's an aspect of the work that Emma's been doing a lot of planning for. Transport, how we get things to where they need to be. So when we've got warm packs, energy saving packs, how do we make those accessible to people that can access them? The essentials, looking at the way we provide food, energy, and other support to struggling families, how people can collect things in their local areas, look at how we broaden out the linkage there to physical assets such as food and money and energy, as well as the warm packs, but also think about how we make better use in signposting to other support that's available, such as the Household Support Fund, local welfare provision, essential items grants, and other things there which people may not be so well aware of. Recognising that now we're expecting to see a lot more people struggling that haven't struggled in the past, and then therefore they're not going to know where to go to be able to access the support that's available. One of the challenges we had when we were developing the Tackling Poverty strategy was that a lot of the data that comes nationally has quite a lag on it, often 1 or 2 years lag. That's no good for seeing how things are changing in real time and what impact we're seeing locally on the cost of living crisis. So what we're doing is leading a work stream on data, to draw on much more reliable and faster data sources, looking at what the VCS are seeing, what citizens' advice are seeing through their one front door, what demand we're seeing, or change in demand we're seeing through the food bank and other avenues, and how we get real-time data there to feed in, as well as looking at what's coming out through the census and the CACI paycheck household income data, which allows us to understand much better where households could be struggling and then target support and communications at those. So being able to pick up on those that previously were in quite a sound position but are now finding themselves with increased mortgage costs, really struggling to balance their budget when you match that alongside the increase in energy prices. So that targeting is really helpful there. And also the other side of that is monitoring take up. So while we've got these offers there across the voluntary sector, how are people engaging with it? How many people are taking it up? And what can we do to make sure that supply and demand are matched on that? And then all of this needs to be wrapped up with communications. So very much picking up on how people can practically access the help they need, how we can signpost them to the support that's available, and really supporting those people who haven't struggled in the past to know where to go, to be able to do it in a way they feel that they can access it. And one of the things that was really focused on at the start of developing the tackling poverty strategy was the need to destigmatize the need to ask for help, and people shouldn't feel scared to say that they're struggling. And that's particularly important as more and more people are in more difficult and challenging positions. And part of this is going to be done through storytelling and real life examples that help people come forward. But it's also important in attracting some of the volunteers that we need to help out, so people can see why they might want to volunteer, what they're going to get out from it, and how their time is able to help people that are really in need of that support. And then this obviously needs to be joint messaging between the council and the Hardship Alliance to really maximise the impact and number of people that see what we're trying to do and how they can access the support. So some of the early things there that we're doing. So developing a range of different approaches that people can access the services, making sure that the interventions we're looking at are very much data and evidence led and able to respond to rising demand that we're seeing coming through and able to predict that. Making sure that the messaging is right and targeted in a way that really engages people in that, and looking at how we get the right resources, the right people resources within the council and within the VCS through attracting new volunteers as well to help out. So that's a very quick run through of where we are. What we're hoping to get tonight as well is some thoughts from members that help inform the planning and the response that we've got. Think about how we work better. I think we're in a very strong position with having the Hardship Alliance and being able to have a joint approach to this, but there's always opportunities to enhance the working with the wider voluntary community sector, with our towns and parishes and with the local communities, to really make sure we've got a very focused offer that's open to anybody that needs the support. So that was just designed to be a very quick run through of what we're doing to try and address this, to allow plenty of time for questions and for discussion, and hoping that Emma and Jake will be able to help out with some of your thoughts, some of your questions around where we are and what we're doing by way of response.
Thank you, Mark, for the presentation. Emma and Jake, did you want to say anything beforehand?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that would be great. Thank you. I'm pressing all sorts of buttons here, so I don't know if I've just turned something off, but never mind. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jake. I'm Chief Executive of Sittings Advice Wokingham. I've been here now for 4 years. I think my particular concern right now is, and I've been using this for quite a bit recently, is that in 2019, which was my first full year here, we were referring people, the amount of people we referred to the food bank in 2 months, we do in a morning now. So this morning, we referred more people to the food bank than we did in 2 months in 2019. Citizens Advice obviously is an advice and information service. We help people with benefits, debt, housing problems. Just as a look at our data today, so far this year up to 16th of October, compared to the same period last year, we're helping 48% more people with benefit issues, 27% more with debt issues. So our core issues are continuing to grow, but it's not unusual anymore for us to have an email from someone who says, on Saturday morning, I've got no food, and we'll wait for us to reopen on Monday to be able to make referrals and do assessments. And that's difficult. It's difficult clearly for the family, the individuals that are going through that. One of the only good things there is that those people are reaching out for help. But we've been really proud that since the start of the pandemic, we could answer about 95, 96% of demand, but the demand has shot up. So again, we've had 36% more calls, again, same period up to 16th of October. So statistics obviously is interesting, but that's 3,500 more calls. So it's not just, 10 more calls that we couldn't answer. This is 3,500 more people. And the challenge there again is that a lot of those will be about access to essentials, and then a lot of them are around trying to ensure that they don't end up in a crisis. So our crisis used to be, again, pre-pandemic, the bailiffs are outside. That was the crisis. That was Citizens Advice's baseline for someone being in crisis. Now I'm regularly pulled out of meetings because we have people calling up saying they're self-harming or they are suicidal. And obviously mental health that Rachel talked about, really important, really personal passion of mine. About a third of our staff and volunteers are trained in mental health first aid. So again, we take it really seriously. But again, I said, these are the regular crises now that we are seeing. And if we could just spend 2 more minutes on the survey. So I don't know if people heard about our survey that we put out. So we put out a cost of living survey. So we had 680 responses to that today. And we're pulling this up into a report through the Hardship Alliance that I'm sure will be able to be shared. But some concerning stats are that out of those 680 people, 75% have not reached out to any services for support in terms of, Citizens Advice and other organisations, the council, etc. And then the next largest cohort of people is 19%, which is a mixture of borrowing from family and friends, the bank, payday loans, doorstep lenders and loan sharks to be able to pay for outgoings. 21% of those individuals, the 680, are using borrowing or credit regularly to pay for essentials such as food and rent. And then if I can just finish off with just a couple of, because I'm sure there's been lots of questions, obviously, but a couple of the quotes that are coming through from people. Catastrophic, we're a working family with our own family business, and what was once a stable financial home is now a worrying mess. We're barely meeting our monthly bills, which leaves almost nothing for food and other essentials. It's very worrying, especially as I'm a single mum. It feels even more depressing as I work full time, and it feels almost pointless as I'm still then broke each month. As pensioners, this inflation is destroying our retirement. And I'll just do one more. It's worrying because I'm going on maternity leave in 3 weeks. Prior to all the increases, we would have been okay for the year, even with a slightly tighter budget. But now I have to return to work much earlier than planned. Our household earns £84,000 per annum between the two of us. So as high earners, comparatively, we have still felt the impact and have made changes to accommodate. And then one more underneath, talking about having to relocate out of Berkshire due to the cost of living.
Thank you, Jake. Emma, do you want to say anything?
Thank you. I'm Emma Cantrell, Chief Executive of First Days Charity. Just to really reiterate what Jake is saying, that it is, I've been working for 10 years with families in Wokingham, and this is the worst it's been by so far. We used to see the type of issues I'm seeing now is what I used to see in families in parts of really deprived areas of London that I worked in prior to moving here. It's really grim for families. We tried to reduce the demand for our service 2 years ago in order to work with fewer families more intensely to try and help them come to solutions to some of their problems so that they wouldn't need to rely on hardship support. And actually, we've ended up helping 60% more families than we would have done, because we can't ignore the need for basic essentials on our doorstep. And I think one thing that I think is really important to mention is that we've got a cost of living crisis now that will cause, immediate problems in the next 6 months. But we all know that any sort of deprivation leads to increased homelessness, increased domestic abuse, increased neglect of children. So the knock-on effect and the long-term effect can't be ignored whilst we're making these plans now. But I think Jake's data speaks for itself.
Okay, thank you. Opening up to the members here. So who would like to start? David.
Well, thank you, guys. I mean, that was I don't know what word to use to describe what we just heard, actually, and to read the information in this report. Other than nothing is, your efforts are fantastic. As a society, I think we need to be ashamed of ourselves, but leave that for another time. On the specifics of this, and on the hard numbers, there aren't any on the actual report. Clearly, one impact is going to be on council officer time. There's a lot of names of officers supporting the initiatives here. I don't doubt the value of what they're doing, but I'd like to have some sense of how much of the workload in position this is going to be on those members, and will they be taken away from other tasks, or is this an additional stress on some of the council officers?
Mark, are you able to respond to that?
Yep, I can respond to that, yeah. And this is an additional pressure on the people that are supporting this. I think each of the assistant directors that's been named there is coming together on a fortnightly basis to lead the response, but doing a lot of work in the interim periods to develop with the Hardship Alliance leads what the response is. But I think the people that are named there, people like Vicky in Children's Services, this is very much aligned to their day job and to the things that we need to be doing to support the people that are really, really struggling. We're working very closely with colleagues in public health and the natural social care. So I think it is definitely an impact on people's time, but it's very much part of what we need to be doing. And we're also very reliant on them for the data that's coming through. So how they're seeing things like changes in the number of referrals and the severity of things coming through the children's social care front door, things like that. So I think it is important that we do commit the time of the officers to be able to support this and to help out people that are struggling, as well as picking up on the impact on their services as this transpires.
Thank you. I think it's also worth adding, David, that this is a corporate and political priority. We recognise the importance of this. So committing resource is very important. We've not got vast amounts of money we can devote to how the Hardship Alliance tries to tackle this crisis, but we can put other kinds of resource in, perhaps more easily. And it is going to involve redeployments and taking people away from other things, but this is a really high priority for all of us, I think.
Adrian.
Thank you very much for the presentations. And I would like to extend a welcome to Jake and Emma, who do, I think, fantastic work in our community. And I also want to say a huge thank you to everybody involved in this whole programme. I think it's a very, very good idea of trying to get everybody to work together and share resources, share time. I know there was a question about that, but I'm actually very encouraged by all this. I think it's essential, and some of the statistics and some of the quotes of the impact read out, we can absolutely see this on a daily basis. I think, people coming into your organisations in dire straits. I think the thing that concerns me is always numbers and money. And, we have this 525K, which is probably not going to, cover the tip of the iceberg, is it? Let's be frank. One thing that I would want to see is that officers if they get any sort of inkling from any central government function that there is any sort of a relief or centralised government funding for cost of living or anything, if there's any sniff of that, please can we really proactively request that? I think one of the things that people think when they see Wokium, they think, wow, these are rich guys. These guys earn 84 grand, whatever it is, whatever. But these people have huge leverage mortgages and very expensive situations in life, and they probably don't have a lot of savings. And one slight blip in something turns a very successful family into a failing family very, very quickly. And I see this as being a massive issue now, and even worse from next May when the utility bills are likely to go to 4,000 or higher, or whatever it is that is the projections now. So I'm very, very concerned about all this. But my question really is about the officers and trying to get them to try and identify if there's any other funding.
They are doing it. I can tell you for certain.
Jake, yep.
Thank you. So I'm sort of sponsoring, or whatever the right phrase is, for the developing local needs area, and just in response to your question as well, David. So working with Ingrid Slade, who's Assistant Director, and I don't know the official title, but covers public health as well. And again, a lot of the stuff we're seeing in the survey, but also through our services, are people who are cutting back on anything that is seen as discretionary, such as gym membership, anything with a sort of healthy, active lifestyle to it. And we're looking again at, which certainly not speaking on behalf of Ingrid, because I'm sure if I promised her money, they wouldn't be happy with that. But there are potential huge health consequences with some of the decisions or lack of things that people do over the winter. So a lot of the quotes here are people saying, look, we're really going to put our heating on 1 hour a day and we'll sit with a blanket around us all day, but that in itself is also not healthy. So they can wrap up as much as they want, but with lack of circulation, they will still end up with a lot of health problems. So it's about trying to see what we can do with sort of health funds and other pots of funds, and that might not have traditionally, so as part, again, your question, David, might not traditionally see these things as anti-poverty or tackling poverty, but actually the consequences now of some of the decisions people are having to make mean we're going to have to start using some of those other areas of society like health to support people.
Okay, Shirley.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone for the presentation. I have real mixed feelings about this. I'm absolutely in awe of everybody who's working at the front end and of dealing with poverty. And I'm a trustee of a charity which is working with people who have been suffering hardship for a very long time, and we're getting more and more people coming to us. But I do have mixed feelings because I feel that we've got to remember that we should be holding the government to account on this. This is not it's been exacerbated recently by all manner of factors. However, the poverty in Wokingham has been here for a long time. It's just been fairly well hidden, and the government needs to be held to account because they've not been funding this council properly for an awfully long time, and that's the really important thing to bear in mind. And one of the things that really made me think about this is in this report, and it actually says it is intended to run a crowdfunding campaign in association with Berkshire Community Foundation to raise extra money. Now, I realise that you do need extra money. However, councils should not be running crowdfunding campaigns to fund services such as this. And I think we just need to kind of get a grip on that. It just really makes me angry that we're in this position. So I just kind of wanted to get that across, but I don't want to take anything away from what you guys are doing because it's fantastic.
Okay, I'll go with Emma first, then Rachel.
Thank you. Just to say, to build on that, It's also hugely problematic for charities working in the anti-poverty field in this area, because so much national funding from grants and trusts is diverted to those areas with extremely high levels of deprivation, which is good, but it means that areas like Wokingham are ignored. So there's huge pots of money that us as an organisation can't access because, you know, there is wealth. So, and that's a huge problem. And unfortunately, the focus of our work for years has been on equaling up inequality, and there's always been that entrenched hardship, but it's been less. But that is now growing and growing and growing, and that's the problem. So not only do we have a huge issue around inequality, especially for children, but also then now this just actual hunger and inadequate homes and all of those things. But it's really difficult for charities as well to get hold of funding in this field in this borough.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I totally understand, Emma, why it's being done, you know, because you need the money and the need is there. And I you know, absolutely. But, you know, Wokingham Council should not be in that sort of position where they're actually having to crowdfund for services. You know, it goes back to the lack of funding over many, many years. But I wanted to ask just one other question, if I may, quickly, while I've got the mic. And that is on the developing a needs-led approach, and it says under targeted approach, it says establishing the cohort of residents who are most at risk, leading to death, significant illness, etc. And I'd just be interested to know how you were doing that, how you were actually doing this, and I don't know whether that's a question for Mark really. How are you targeting the people and making sure that you reach the people who really are in need of help?
Yeah, I can certainly help with that one. And we have that aspect being led by public health, but in working closely with GPs and others to try and identify those that are most in need. So we're looking at getting a GP rep onto our fortnightly group to help with this work, but there are there's modelling going on with adult social care data. We're looking at those people that are coming out of hospital that are likely to be discharged and that are going to need some form of support, and thinking what could we do to try and minimise the impact on them and enable them to come out and stay out of hospital rather than bouncing back in. So again, that's working very closely with public health and adult social care to think, is there more that we can do around targeting some of the food support so they don't come out of hospital with no food. If they're needing things like some of the blankets, some of the warm equipment and things that we're able to provide, how do we make sure that's lined up for the right time for them? So it's at early stage of it's working through, and hopefully with having a GP rep involved within the next couple of weeks at our meetings, and that will also help with greater targeting of that. But the discussions are very well underway, and hopefully we'll help address what we're expecting to see by way of increased numbers of people leaving hospital, but avoid more of them bouncing back in, because it's a nice warm place where they're well fed. So if we can provide them with some of the things to help them at home, then that should hopefully alleviate the situation a bit.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Rohanna, I see your hand is up. What we're going to do is we're going to ask from the parishes to ask their questions once we've done all the member questions. Okay, so I'm going to pass back over to Stephen and Rachel. They've both got comments.
Super, thank you. I just wanted to respond to a couple of really good points which have been made around the table. I think, first of all, to pull out something that a couple of people have touched on, which is that there are a lot of people in this area who do have high incomes and who do generally have quite comfortable lives. And that fact in itself can make life very much harder for a lot of our residents who are living on the lowest incomes. And I think there's two main reasons for that. First of all, it means that the prices in the area are typically higher, particularly for things like housing, but also for food. I mean, you see inflated prices for food in some of our local shops, for example. And secondly, because it means that a lot of people who are living on low incomes do feel very isolated, and they don't necessarily know where to turn. Whereas in some areas where there's higher deprivation, there can also be a greater support network within the community, both with voluntary organisations and simply, you know, informal networks, neighbours, for example, who can advise you on who to go to if you're really struggling. The other point I wanted to make is following on from what Shirley said. I think lobbying is something which is going to be really important, making our case to central government, and this is on a cross-party basis of where we need assistance, where we need help as a borough from central government. And I'm going to give one example, and that is funding for those families who normally rely on free school meals in term time during the school holidays. So we have moved over time. A lot of people, I think, will remember the campaign that Marcus Rashford ran very successfully to persuade the government to provide vouchers to help these families in the school holidays. That over time has turned into funding, which has come to the council through the Household Support Fund, which we have chosen to spend on supporting these families. I am quite concerned about whether that funding will continue because of the financial situation of the council. It is going to be very important that we continue to get that funding from central government so that we can continue to support some of the very most vulnerable people in our community. So thank you very much for raising that, Shirley.
And I just wanted to, you're absolutely right, Rachel. The worst thing is to be on a low income and not very well off in an area that's wealthy. That's really tough for all the reasons you've said, but it's also tough because the council, to come back to Shirley's earlier point, lacks the resource because it's not seen as a council that needs to be supported to the same extent as others need to be. It's seen as having low deprivation levels, so therefore not needing to receive so much central government support. I think we have to be realistic. We are going to be living, and I think very recent developments have made that very clear, in an era where we cannot expect we're going to get a lot more out of government. And that is part of the logic of the partnership agenda. To put it bluntly, we can achieve more by working together than we can achieve on our own. And that is the principle that lies behind this, maximising the resources, the expertise, calling on our community more widely to help us. And I think this is a great example of this. The Hardship Alliance exactly exemplifies that. But there's a lot more work to be done in other areas where partnership can also help us in really difficult financial situation.
Pauline?
Thank you very much. Just to come back on that point about cross-party lobbying, can I assure you that we'll give you our support as well? So we're very, very happy to help with that. I'm actually the chairman of trustees of a national charity, which does relief similar to this, but to a limited population. A lot of our money gets spent around London, but some of it gets spent in Spain and in Ireland and all sorts of places. One of the things I've noticed recently with the people applying is that more people have been left in a position where they can't afford to live because of debt. And particularly, you mentioned payday loans. If you can help clear their debt, then they can keep their heads above water. But when they've got debt and the interest rates can be prohibitive, they're in this downward spiral. And I'm just wondering if there's any help or thought about how you deal with that, because it is quite difficult. But sometimes it's only 300 or 400 quid. It can make all the difference.
So thanks, Pauline. I think I caught up with our debt team recently, and so this year compared to last year, we've got less debt written off, so less money in terms of debt solutions are being solved, and obviously I was challenging that. And the issue comes to a little bit of what you were just saying, which is people tend to have more than one or two debts, and if they had a write-off now, it won't deal with some of the other things that are about to come down the pipeline. So sadly, we've got a lot of people that we're working with at the moment where we're having to wait for some of their debt to get worse or to land before we then offer some debt solutions. But actually made to know, because obviously last time we spoke similar on the grant that you're talking about, and what we're fortunate to have in Wokingham is the United Charities Essential Items grants of up to £500. And I know that they've talked for a number of years around, so typically that buys someone a washing machine if it's broken down or whatever, but it's about being what you've just described, really, which is, well, relief in need. It's the idea that there's a little bit of a wriggle room here where we can help you out and hope that that will help lift you out of the situation that you're in, whilst that you're getting other support like income maximisation. I know that they pay for bankruptcy orders and debt relief order fees at the moment, because you have to pay to be declared bankrupt as well, obviously, and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think it's something we need to look at. But as I said, we're seeing 27% more clients with debt issues, but of course there's a capacity issue in terms of them as well.
And certainly the ones I've been seeing are quite often things like utility bills and that sort of stuff. And you just end up in this hopeless position where you just can't make things balance. If you can just make that go away, it only happens to happen once, and then your head's above water again.
What I think would be really good for the Hardship Alliance to start addressing, with the council, is how the local authority are treating individuals across all services. So we have a family we work with who was moved 6 years ago into council accommodation, a survivor of domestic abuse, and she took out a questionable loan to get flooring put into her property, which the houses to come without flooring. She's still paying off that loan 6 years later, and as a result of that, she's in quite significant council tax arrears, which, she's working with Citizens Advice to come up with a solution to that. Now, that problem could have been avoided had the flooring issue not been an issue to begin with. And it's all about joining up all of the resources we've got in the community, because we do actually have those resources in the community to provide those things. But unless the housing department knew that and got the family in touch with the right people to get the right stuff in place, it could have all been prevented. So that's, I think, an opportunity we've got to prevent those things from happening again as part of this work.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to, rather than going to talk about that, I'm just going to give Stephen a pointer to that as something that you should be doing from a housing point of view. I'm bearing in mind we've got a lot to get through.
But I have already actioned officers in the housing department to look into that issue.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, going on to Norman.
Thank you. We're very fortunate in this borough to have, the officers that are working on this and the charities and all the volunteers that are working. I think it's great, the work that's being done. So thank you also for that. I just wanted to think about you've talked about some of the aspects that by joined up working we can solve potentially, or at least parts of. One area, I suppose, that ends up being rather difficult is just paying for energy costs, for example, and utility bills. And that, in the end, either requires some sort of discount system or that we've got to find cash to help pay for these sorts of things. You've mentioned crowdfunding. I'm not sure how you would envisage that might work, or you're also asking for sort of other ideas. I mean, what sort of things can we do locally to raise funds? Bear in mind Shirley's sort of point about government funding and so on. So what can we do locally to address fuel costs, probably more than anything, but other things as well?
People all looked, I could sense the eyes looking at me. I probably can't answer that particular question, but just on the crowdfunding particular point, I think, so again, aside from Citizens Advice, I'm a trustee of United Charities, and for those who don't know, they've got a £12 million endowment from land that someone left in 1607 or something. So it's in a really good position in that they can spend the money that comes from the investments in the local area. And they decided to take some of their reserves out, because obviously reserves are always about a crisis, and we haven't had a greater one than this at the moment. So the point that came up about crowdfunding was if United Charities are going to give £70,000, at least for now, they're looking at more before Easter, then how do we maximise that 70,000? So if the council then said, well, actually we could match that, and then BCF say we could get businesses to match that, you turn 70 grand into £210,000 or whatever. So that's the goal with that. In terms of what that's then spent on, we again haven't had any of those discussions. As Emma said, the challenge definitely is around how charities can then respond to people who are then coming to us for needs. But obviously, we've also got a concern of all those that aren't coming for help, who are going to be struggling in their own homes without asking for help. And maybe that's something we just then need to take back into what does that crowdfunding pot actually benefit? What does that actually then do? But I just pulled something up while you're talking. One of the things that National Citizens Advice are talking for, because our dual aim is give advice but also use that data to lobby for change, is to those that obviously are being chased for debt who can't then pay it, are being forced onto prepayment meters if they can't cover their bills. Citizens Advice are calling for a winter ban on energy companies using this practice over this winter, so that people aren't then put onto prepayment meters where they then won't have energy at certain points, and because obviously when they top up, it'll take that slice first off. And whether we can, again, the council, etc., could be writing to those companies to help push that message.
I would have thought that energy companies could certainly help in regard to that at this time, especially some of the large ones that are also extracting gas and oil, which are doing pretty well at the moment. So it would be good to see them helping.
Thank
you. Just a couple of things, aside from what's already been said. I was wondering, I believe you're developing a dashboard. I just wondered how that's been constructed.
Show you here if you want.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I think some people have seen it, some haven't. So again, no, it's just a private response with that, I suppose, here. But there's two things I think we've been feeding in this. We've got a public cost of living dashboard, which we have sent to members, but I'll happily send out again. So again, sadly, only for Anne's benefit, you can see here the month by month how cost of living issues have grown since 2019 to September 2022. But there's lots of different data in there about people on prepayment meters, housing issues, debt issues, and then the profile of those individuals as well. So Sally Watkins, who is a fantastic officer here at the council, who seems to be responsible for everything at the moment, Stephen, is obviously big on data as well. So we talked to Sally about this, and then Sally's point was, but we've got all this council tax data, housing data. I think Mark was talking about payroll, but maybe Mark should come on this as well, by the way. But all that data. So we're submitting this weekly to the data team at the council to build their own council-wide, so we don't have to go all these different links. But just for assurance of people, none of the data that Citizens Advice shares identifies any individual, because our key aim is that it's an impartial, independent, confidential service. But the issues that we're seeing are being fed into the council every week. So the stuff that populates this dashboard is now with Mark's, Emily's on here as well, actually, but Mark's just come up. So to build that bigger database so that you've got that one sort of source of information that you can then go on.
Yeah, and just to add to what Jake said, we are doing work to pull that stuff together along with council data as well, which will look at change and things. So the number of people who get misdirect debits on their council tax or their housing rent, people paying on credit card for those things, which signifies that people could be struggling. So the whole range of data that Emily's team is pulling together to look at that and really be able to much more quickly see the change that's coming there, and that's what will form the dashboard, which will then be reported on a fortnightly basis. So we're able to really see and respond to things very, very quickly. And Jake's data that he's pulled together is really, really helpful in that. But it's also thinking about what is seen at the food bank and share in different outlets where people are going to. So how we really maximise what we're seeing to be able to get as much of the pitch as we can, because none of us, not the council or Citizens Advice or any one organisation, is going to the whole picture. But by pulling each of these bits together, then we'll have a much better understanding of what the real picture looks like within the borough.
That's great, thank you. Another question I had was, I noticed parish councils are mentioned in the presentation, and I was thinking that this sort of thing hasn't typically been their field, and I wondered what was envisaged. What perhaps put that as a role for parish councils.
So I think we're going to open up to the parish council shortly. So hopefully one of the members who is a parish council person will answer that. But I think Emma's going to make a contribution here. Could you just turn your microphone on, please, sir?
Yeah. So from a practical engagement point of view, we have already started reaching out to the towns and parishes. And I know that from a council point of view, where the council is the landlord of town and parish buildings, they have been written to suggest that they get involved with the response to the cost of living crisis, and that their building could potentially be a great space to host warm space activity. So we're engaging with them on that front. And then from a funding point of view, the aim is to encourage towns and parishes as much as we can to look at cost of living as a real demand on their funding that they give out to charity and community groups. So we're doing a lot of sharing of information and trying to engage with the towns and parishes. And, you know, there are some absolutely fantastic clerks who are really engaged. And I had an offer today for funding to host a warm space in one of the parishes. So they're engaged in that respect.
Thank you very much. That sounds very good. And the other thing, it seems to me, Shirley's point about, you know, how do you target the vulnerable seems so crucial. But I was thinking, you want to raise this isn't exactly what everybody's priority might be, but raising the profile of this issue with volunteers, those who donate to food banks, might seem a, you know, small thing, but you could find that there is quite a lot of people who could do more. And it wouldn't cost anybody anything.
In terms of engaging with volunteers?
Yes, that sort of thing.
So,
also increasing donations to food banks, because
absolutely. So we're working with Woking Volunteer Centre for specifically recruiting volunteers to support the organisations involved in this response. But also the comms work stream of this, I think, is the most important one. There's a lot of information that individual households would really benefit from in terms of what they can do to get support and lower their costs and all of those things, but crucially how they can get involved. Because what we do know, what we saw in the pandemic and what we do know in this community is that there are a lot of people who want to do a lot to help. They just need to be told how. So we are engaging with the volunteer centre to try and coordinate that as well.
Could I just say, not just Wokingham, but also other towns, Woodley and Early?
I meant the borough.
Shirley, I think you had something.
Yeah, thank you. We mentioned meters a little while ago, and one of the interesting things about these prepayment meters, not only are people paying a lot of money, a lot extra for their unit costs, and you know, if they put on a £40 top up, £10 of that, if they've got arrears, goes straight into the arrears. But the other thing is that a lot of them are not designed to work with smart meters. So it's actually difficult for those residents to see where they're using power excessively. You know, they could see, oh, what's using 2 or 3p an hour. Oh, it's my television. I'll turn it off. I won't leave it on all day. That kind of thing. That would be really helpful. And it just seems really unfortunate that a lot of the providers are saying, no, you can't have a smart meter with a prepayment meter. So that's an issue, and I don't know how we can't as a council solve that, but it's you know, something that needs to be sort of looked at. And on the subject of that Emma mentioned about the young lady who moved into a council flat and has got into debt paying for flooring, and this is something I think that should be taken up with housing in terms of when my mum died, she was in a council flat and she had very, very nice carpets, very, very nice curtains. And I phoned the council and said, look, you know, they're really nice. I'm sure the person who moves in could do with these. No, we want them all out, get rid of them. And so did what they said, got it all out. And I used to drive past my mum's flat for months and months afterwards. And the person who had moved in there just had old bits of blanket hanging up at the windows when she could have actually had really nice curtains. And I was really angry about that at the time. It was well before I was a councillor. I'm going back a number of years now. But I was really angry that that had happened. So, and the last thing is talking about comms. Is the next issue of the Borough News? Could this be featuring a whole lot of stuff about how to get help, but also encouraging people to volunteer and to help as well?
If I could just answer your point on housing first. This is what I've had a discussion with the Assistant Director for Housing about, and we are going to try and change policy. So I don't know how quick that will be instituted, but it's part of the action that I've given the Assistant Director. On comms, you'll have seen recently we had a very good email newsletter, weekly email newsletter, had an extremely good one. I think it was one of the best we've put out, listing all of the contacts and all of the places where you could get help. That has received an enormous amount of praise from a lot of people across the borough. And I think that's the way we've got to go, more of that.
Yeah, but I think that that's great. But obviously, you know, there are a lot of people who haven't got, aren't getting emails from the council, and you know, perhaps something landing through the letterbox, the Housing Matters or the Borough News, and having something on the front page, you know, that entices people in might help. So certainly worth exploring.
Completely agree with that. And Mark has been doing quite a lot to get information into print, as well as onto social media, so that we're using various communication channels to get to people. And one of the things I would really like to suggest to councillors right round the table is if we can contact our residents association to make the residents associations aware. And in particular to point them towards the summary of really good advice which Stephen just mentioned, which was circulated to all of us as councillors. That provides an excellent summary for people of where they can get help and how they can keep their outgoings as low as possible. So everything that we can do as councillors to get the message out there would be really helpful.
David.
Thank you. Just two small points, both on communications. The name, for want of a word, Hardship Alliance, is that just an internal working umbrella phrase, or is it something that's going to have an external existence so that the public will see it and it's a kind of an umbrella out there? Because if so, part of me was thinking, how does that marry up with the kind of risk of stigmatising people? And is that the most welcoming phraseology? I don't know, but it's one to think about. And just alongside that, I think two or three of us have mentioned during the course of the discussion the concept of crowdfunding. And I'm sure somebody said crowdfunding the council. However we communicate this, I'm sure we don't want to describe it as crowdfunding the council, or we're going to have a disaster on our hands. It's got to be about crowdfunding the voluntary sector.
On the second one, I think that's why Mark put in the BCF bit. I think the view would be the Berkshire Community Foundation would be the source of the crowdfunding, and then would help distribute whatever it is that comes from that. I think on the comms, so on the Hardship Alliance stuff, I think we have this conversation every so often. I think, you know, my view is that it's a collective of organisations that come together for a particular common purpose. But for lots of the organisations around that table, it is a part of what they do, and they then do also lots of other work. So we've sort of seen it as, you know, one of those things that goes on your letterhead, that you're part of this sort of grouping of people. We talked about what we'd like the slogan to be, and that was the Wokingham Borough Community Response, which seemed to work very well in the COVID pandemic, which was anybody could be put, schools, GPs were all part in some way of the Wokingham Borough Community Response, and it was completely destigmatising because the view was it's the community, it's everybody around us. I think, as was said, the newsletters are certainly really useful. And the reason I know they're useful is because we've got 80 volunteers. They tend to tell me they've just read it in the news and on the newsletter, and we're going to end up flooded with demands. But I think my particular concern with comms, and obviously Emma said it is going to be the single most important bit, is we're going to have to keep thinking of creative ways to get messages across. And we, again, I remember when Martin Sloan was here through the pandemic, we constantly tried that then with COVID, which was about no wrong reason to reach out for help and all that type of stuff, because COVID was impacting people in different ways. The problem we do have here is we're talking about people's finances, and people's finances is one of those stigmatizing things. Regardless of whether you do earn 100 grand, you still don't really want to be seen to be talking about earning 100 grand. So I think money in all respects is something that is taboo, and how we found those ways of helping. And one of the issues we had in the pandemic about the no wrong reason was we ended up with, but what is the reason then? Because if you say there's no wrong reason, what is the actual reason to get in touch? And I think we've got similar issues now. Again, some of the feedback in here, hence people getting loans, was I don't want to end up relying on benefits. And that's a I suppose a cultural or value driven view that individuals and households might have, that we need to help them appreciate the whole reason of having a welfare benefit system as a safety net to catch you so that you don't fall below that. You know, we're trying to encourage people to use the benefit calculator online with, again, the view that you don't need to queue up outside the job centre here. You don't have to queue up outside the council or sit in device or whatever. It's a discreet way. You know, one of the most popular times we get emails is midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's often when people say, I've put the kids to bed now, here's my issues. And we're sort of trying to encourage people, well, do this benefit calculator. It takes you 10 minutes and you'd lose nothing because you don't put your contact details in, you simply put your circumstances in. And then if you're eligible, at least you know, and then you've got some time to think about whether that is what you want to apply for. So pension credit is the most underclaimed benefit in the country. And a lot of the responses here are from pensioners who are saying, we're having to contribute to our adult children's home, and they're probably going to have to end up moving in with us. Well, pension credit might just be that extra little bit of help for people. So with the comms, I think there's just, for me, and I don't know the answer, although I said I gave it half an hour ago, it's just the view of it's all well and good asking people to come for help, but there's loads of people saying I don't want to come for help, and it's just how do we get across either self-serve help or, you know, stories from individuals. And again, Mark's team and Emily's team and stuff always sort of say, do we have case studies that we can use? But again, notoriously with issues around poverty, even when you've helped someone out of that situation, they tend not to want to be put in the spotlight to talk about those issues. But often it is the connection with someone else who's been through that helps you realise that you're in a similar position. So I would just encourage us to constantly be looking at how we get that message across. And when I spoke to some of the councillors last week, it was also when people are coming to your surgeries, think about what else is available. Don't just think about your referral into services within the council and stuff.
Thank you, Jake. I'm going to give Gregor a question because he has one. Then I'm going to give myself a question to ask you some. Then I'm going to go to the parishes because I'm very conscious we've got some more stuff going on, but I still want to give people a fair share to speak. So, Gregor.
Yeah, not a question, just a thought in terms of communications. So during COVID, one of the things that Dave Allen and I did from a comms perspective was we started putting signs up on our lampposts. And the purpose of doing that was because we wanted something very, very visible that anybody that was out doing their sort of daily mandated exercise would see, would be able to come into contact with, and it would give them very clear instruction about what was expected of them in terms of social distancing or what other information we wanted to get out. Lampposts are absolutely everywhere. People cannot help but see a sign that is attached to every other lamppost. It may be a way, an interesting and novel, very effective way of communicating out to residents who, might be a bit fearful to ask for help, who might not want to necessarily be seen noting down a phone number or something like that. If it's regularly communicated, it's in near people's homes, not just in town centres. It may be an opportunity to communicate a message out to say, here are some numbers you can call, here's a website that you can go to, here's a QR code that you can just scan with your phone, and it will take you through to where you can get help. And also the other thing is all of the lampposts are owned by Woking Borough Council, so we can do what we want with them.
Thank you, Gregor. Rachel, you did say you looked like you're going to say something there.
Yes, I was just referring back actually to the crowdfunding idea. And just to give my understanding, a lot of the discussions at the moment are around using that because it is a platform which is quite useful for people who may want to make donations to help people in their local area. So it's really it's a good, well understood platform that we might choose to adopt for local people who want to donate to other local people.
Okay, Stephen, you look very short.
I just really wanted to say thank you, Gregor, for your suggestion, and we'll certainly look into that.
Okay, I'm going to give myself some questions. So one thing that I heard about this weekend, this goes to mental health, was ambulance service being phoned by older people who have had an accident at home, and it turns out they just want to talk to somebody. So I don't know whether that's on your register of things of a potential clientele there. That's just a comment. With regards to companies, we do have some larger companies in this area, Oracle and Microsoft, and I know that they do have employee volunteer programs, and I know that some of them actually, if the employees do £1, then the company will do £1. So I don't know whether you've approached those people or not.
Yes, so lots of individual charities in the borough have got relationships with lots of those businesses, but the Volunteer Centre are putting on a networking event with those big corporate volunteer prospects at the end of next month, where local charities can come and kind of pitch for their business. So that is happening.
On the mental health, on the isolation, which can lead to obviously issues around mental health, we've got charities obviously like the Link Visiting Scheme who do the befriending service and stuff like that. But yeah, my big concern is around the isolation that people are going to be experiencing this winter as they make choices where they're not able to spend to go and have even very small leisure activities. So again, just through the work that I've been trying to, or the meetings I've been having with people, I met with the Archdiocese recently because I've been working with them on some anti-poverty stuff for the last 3 years, actually across Thames Valley, across Oxfordshire, Archdiocese area, was how we do use those spaces, as Emma was saying about parish and town halls. So if you've got craft clubs and book clubs, and a Cowshire particularly obviously with this craft club every so often, but some of these organisations charge to access these things. So again, talking to Legacy United Charities, maybe Berkshire Community Foundation, is whether they could give micro grants, because £500 there might be able to help people not have to pay their £1, £2, £5 entry fee for the next 4 months. So we're looking at different ways to encourage that. And then the way of getting that message out is through the parish and town newsletters and magazines, and the church newsletters and magazines, and all those type of things to help people. And again, when we talk about stigma, that removes that stigma again, because it's not saying come and not be lonely, it's saying come and do an activity, come and be part of this book club on a Tuesday or something. So yeah, definitely on our radar.
Stephen.
Although potentially rather important, the large corporate bodies in the borough don't just have volunteer programs. Usually, they also have corporate responsibility funds, which we want to try and tap into.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to make.
Just to add to that, don't forget that people whose companies are not in the borough also have a lot of employees in the borough and pensioners in the borough, and can help even if they're not actually headquartered in the borough.
Okay. Before moving on, I did have another point. That was to do with the electricity meter. No, sorry, to do with loans. I'm very concerned to hear you mention payday loans and those. And I just looked up some of the interest rates of those, and they're horrific. Do we have any plan of a community like loan banks? I know there are some that are run about, and that's just throwing that out there.
So I don't know if I've got to be careful, because we're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, so we cannot recommend certain organisations. But what we do know is credit unions are a very good and ethical source of borrowing. I wouldn't mention any in particular, as said, because of the regulations that we're under. But I think yeah, I'm deeply concerned that, and I said it's particularly, well, I'd hope people I just wouldn't like payday loan organisations to exist anyway, of course. But I think my concern is that they are acknowledging that they're using that for the essentials. So we're not talking here about someone saying, actually, do you know what, my car's broke down, I need to, or I'd like to get an upgrade on something. This is people saying food, rent. And Mark obviously talks about that issue with people paying council tax with these things and stuff, and how we can try and find this information out. But yeah, I think promoting ethical loans and borrowing and that sort of stuff would be useful. But again, I know that's always regulated, and that's often why these things aren't easily done. So.
Did you check it?
Yeah, there is a group in that operates in Norrie's ward. I'm going to say Our Community First. They run the lunch club there, and they have talked for many years about a potential credit union in that area. So I think there is potentially some appetite in the community. So it might be something that is worth taking forward, I think.
I see, Beth, have you got a question or are you commenting on that?
I'd like to comment on that, please, because for 10 years I've worked for our local credit union. We've pushed it in lots of areas, and I've worked with food banks throughout Berks, Bucks and Oxon. So I have a huge amount of experience in that area, and I'm very happy to talk to anyone about it at length. But I've recommended folk from the credit union to the CAB. We have mutual customers and also to many food banks. So I'm here, just ask.
Rachel.
Thanks. And I think it's really important that people do have access to ethical sources of lending. And just adding to that as well, one of the things as I was talking to Mark and to Emily about today was I would really like to see us do more to raise awareness of predatory lending practices. So that is absolutely something that we want to raise awareness of within the borough.
Thank you. I think I would like, before I go to the parishes, is just make a suggestion to the members here. Is we did hear about the electricity boards and problems about meters. I think it would be beneficial if parties got together, both all across the board, and see if we can get a motion together to actually take some action on that. Write a letter to all the chairmen of those people. So Pauline, I'm just trying to float something here that's cross parties, actually put some motion together that as a council we write to the chairs of the CEOs of the electric companies or the power companies, whatever, to say, could you please look at how you investigate, how you deal with defaulters, and put some appropriate wording. But I'd like this to be a cross-party thing, please.
Yeah, if we could come up with some agreeable wording between us, I'm sure that we could do that.
Yes, I think that is an excellent idea, and something that we should pick up. I'd be very happy to take that forward with Laura, who obviously is working very closely with us, and obviously with Shirley and Rachel to make that a reality.
Okay. Obviously, we don't get involved in the party politics bit, but we can send you the policy statement from Citizens Advice that asks for this and stuff. So,
great, thank you.
Thanks very much. That'd be useful.
Yeah. Sorry, this follows on from previous comments about prepayment meters, but actually the pricing model is the wrong way around. The whole pricing model is wrong. Firstly, prepayment meters. Second point is standing charges. Third point is the cost per unit. It needs to be, and there was discussion of this today, the German model gives free energy up to a certain level, so zero cost. Then it becomes more expensive. Then once you go over a certain level, it becomes very expensive. So they flip their pricing model around. So if you're going to put a motion together to SSE, etc., it's not only that, it's also their pricing model, which needs to be changed, because things like standing charges really penalise the poorest people the most.
Okay, thank you. I'd suggest various people work on this to actually get the appropriate wording, and then also I think there's some lobbying to do with the local MPs anyway for that as well, so if we could get that done as well. I'm going to pass this on to the parish councils now. So what I'm going to do is give you a question each, and I know Rohan put his hand up first during the meeting, so I'll give Rohan the first stab at this.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for your time.
Could you introduce yourself as well, please?
Yes, so my name's Rohan Rabe-Wardner. I'm the chairman of Twyford Parish Council. Sorry that I couldn't attend in person, but thank you for inviting me to listen to today's session. It's been very informative. One of the ideas that I had was actually working with local schools. I think teachers can often be the first point of contact in identifying issues within families, financial issues, safeguarding issues, debt, food issues. So I wonder whether we could be giving sort of more information to teachers that they know where to signpost families to in order to get the assistance that they need.
Yes, I think that's an absolutely excellent idea, and it's something that we have been talking about, and both with the officers and with Emma in particular, about how we can do more to link in with schools, because very often it is the teachers who will notice the red flags very early. If children are coming to school not having had breakfast, if children are coming to school with shoes which are outgrown, if children don't have coats. So I think it is really, really important that we work with schools, both to pick up where families are starting to struggle, and to look as a council and working in partnership with the Hardship Alliance as to how we can support them, but also because people who may not trust other people, other organisations, may trust their child's teacher. And so I think it's very, very important that we do communicate what we're doing through the schools, and we will definitely be doing more to kind of boost those links. So thank you very much.
I can just comment on that as well. Tomorrow night, I'm actually, or 2 nights' time, I'm talking to the chairs of governors about some of this, and we'll certainly be raising that for them then, because I've been invited along to talk around what we're doing with the cost of living crisis and poverty. But we have got active engagement with the schools, and they're very much one of the communication mechanisms that we use as well to get their support in getting messaging out to parents, not just those in free school meals, but recognising that the one thing that most parents read is the notes that come home from their school. So the more we can do to try and communicate that way, the more access we've got to some people that may be struggling but not aware of what support's needed.
Thank you, Mark. Just state your name and say where you're from, please.
Brilliant. Got the tech to work. Hi, Jonathan Wheelwright from Swallowfield Parish Council. So just the first thing is an observation. It's such a good discussion, and I've been making notes, and I've actually got too many things to ask you about and too many things to comment on. But I mean, it's quite daunting, and for us as a parish, we feel completely out of our depth. So we're very lucky. We're a I wouldn't call us a wealthy parish, but we don't have obvious poverty, but that is the problem, is the fact that it's hidden. And the question for us really is twofold. First of all, how do we draw people in when you've got almost like a peer pressure not to be vulnerable? And then the other thing is as we found during the pandemic, people so want to help. They really want to help. And our community is, we'll all launch forward, but we haven't got a clue, and we don't know how to help. We don't know how to organise ourselves. We don't understand all the different draws that we can pull on. And, Emma and Jake, you were talking earlier, there's so many things that we do not get, but we're willing. And if you could somehow provide us with a framework to understand what we should be doing, how we should be organising ourselves, how we should be linking up with you, in simple terms, that would be hugely helpful. And then the final thing is, I'm sorry to have 3 things, having said it was 2. Somebody mentioned about funding. We raise money through precepts. So we pull money from our parishioners, and that's how we fund the parish council. And it's whether we can legally use that money on a select part of the community, and how can we use that money. It becomes very easy if we open up our spaces, and we try to open up all our halls as warm banks and warm areas, and we're just doing it kind of subtly on the coffee corners are open all day, and we brought games along. Come along and keep us company. We're trying to, and it's warm. We're trying to do it subtly, but again, what can we do with our money
That's all.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that is all absolutely music to our ears. We really are looking for more volunteers to help us. Getting more volunteers is going to be absolutely crucial to being able to deliver what we need to do during this winter. So we will make sure that we take that away and to take that idea that we need to be providing a framework to the town and parish councils. So thank you very much for that, Emma.
Thank you. First of all, your first question, how do we draw people in? You've got it. Universal access is the way to get people to turn up to things. So it's not about, are you cold? It's about, do you want a cup of tea and to join in with this activity? So you've got that. That's good. You're doing the right thing. How do you help? So we are putting together some guidance which should come out in the next week or so about warm spaces and how they could operate and some best practice and what support we can offer as well centrally, because we've got it is arriving as I speak, huge amounts of items that can help people keep warm at home and lower their energy costs and things, which we can distribute through these warm spaces. So that will all come to you. And that should hopefully also give you some pointers on how to engage with volunteers and that framework. But I think your point's really important. We can take back to the meeting on Thursday around a wider suggestions. And in terms of how you spend your money, I've got loads of suggestions. But what your peers in the borough do is give grants. I don't know if you have a grant programme, but what we have to do when we're applying for grants from the various towns and parishes is provide specific data about the number of residents in your specific ward that we support. And all of the local charities, if they know what they're doing, will hold that data. So I would say speak to your counterparts in other areas because they've got really kind of well-designed frameworks set up already.
I just briefly add, please, and also if you're doing events at the moment, we've also got the mobile advice unit that can turn up to things where, so we've been going to the mosque in early fortnightly or monthly now, I think it is, and it took us about 2 or 3 goes before people were comfortable talking to us at that. But we basically have an advisor that's able to come in to particular areas. I'm just looking at Swallowfield here on our heat map. It's certainly in the top half of cost of living issues that we're seeing. So people are reaching out, but certainly we're happy to do outreach stuff there as well. So, but I can share that data with you, certainly.
Just if I may, Jonathan, add something perhaps more relevant to your community than the parish council, but the parish council might be a way of communicating this. All of these voluntary bodies rely on the work of volunteers, and those volunteers are in danger of burnout. Jake started with the exponential rise in the number of people contacting Citizens Advice, seeking help. They desperately, all these organisations desperately need people to come forward and offer to help as volunteers. So it is about money, obviously, but it's about people as well. Trying to increase the resource we've got, the human resource we've got, able to actually help. So if you could put the word out, if you would like to help, and you're right, lots of people in our communities across the borough want to help. A way you can do that, if you can give some money, but you can also give some time, actually volunteer to help one of the voluntary bodies in the Hardship Alliance or beyond the Hardship Alliance that are doing work to help our residents in difficulties.
Okay. I'm going to call this one to an end. Just with your point, it's about communication. So how do volunteers engage with you?
So there is volunteering in terms of this work stream being coordinated by the volunteer centre, which covers the whole borough. But we'll get that information out to you. I think it's really important that we make it really, really clear over the coming couple of weeks.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation, for the interesting talk. You may or may not want to be interested in staying. The next one is fraud. So. Okay, so moving on. Like Sean or Narinda taking this one. Okay, we've got noise in the room at the moment, so yeah, just give us a few seconds. Okay, so let's move on. So please. So Sean, if you want to take it away, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. For those that don't know me, my name's Sean Murphy. I'm the manager of the Shared Public Protection Service, but in particular in a Wokingham context, I manage, amongst other services, the Trading Standards Service and the associated services that sit alongside the Trading Standards Service for the borough here. So I'm just going to go through a very brief presentation, if I may, Chair, with there's 2 or 3 slides in the middle of it from Narinda, but I think there's only about 10 slides in total. So hopefully this won't take too long, and then I'm very happy to answer any questions from the committee. So I'll just share my screen, if I may. Okay, is that come up?
Yep, that's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, so really I just want to talk about, just start off with a very quick run through the type of legislation that the Trading Standards Service actually enforce in this area. So the most obvious one is fraud itself, and in that I'm talking about the Fraud Act. So this is kind of fraud by false representation, fraud by abuse of position, and fraud by omission, in effect. Then occasionally, basically, we still get acts of straightforward theft. And then there is actually the area around fraudulent trading. Now, with fraudulent trading, what we're talking about there is fraud committed by companies. So these are incorporated bodies, and in particular fraud committed by people who are involved in the running of those bodies. So it could be directors, it could be senior officers, but there's a very specific offence that carries up to 10 years, same with fraud and theft. Another type of area of crime that falls within this, and quite often sometimes not seen as crime, is intellectual property crime. So what I'm talking about there is things like trademarks and counterfeiting. More recently, in recent years, we've done an awful lot of work around money laundering, because what we find basically is where you've got substantive crimes such as fraud and unfair trading. Obviously, what generally happens is, or what can happen is, the money then is moved around between individuals, or it's converted basically in a classic money laundering way, basically to hide the fact that it is in fact criminal assets. And then there are a range of other related customs and excise offences, for example, tobacco duty marks and things like smuggled tobacco, cigarettes is an ongoing problem. Just looking then basically at the types of what we call acquisitive crime that we deal with. So there are a few of them here basically listed. I mean, this isn't a complete list, but it includes things that would be commonly associated and commonly known as doorstep crime or rogue trading. I tend not to use the word rogue trading because it gives it a kind of status really which it probably doesn't deserve, because by and large it is either unfair trading or it's fraudulent trading, fraudulent behaviour. Vehicle sale related crime, and over the years we've had a number of big cases that have involved basically car dealers, and that can be anything from classic cases such as back in the day, I suppose it would be things like clocking mileage. Now it's things like falsifying records. So it could be anything from MOT certificates to service records, counterfeiting and distributing of counterfeit goods, and just about anything you can think about basically that has a value finds its way in being counterfeited. And over the years, I must have dealt with absolutely everything from common areas such as clothes and things like that, and things like high value branded goods, all the way through to car parts, car accessories, and even things like batteries for laptops and phones, etc. Other examples of fraud that we tend to see particularly when there's basically a shortage of supply, is advance fee related fraud. So these can be frauds where effectively people take fees, for example, to find a property or something like that, when in fact they never have had the wherewithal, for example, to actually deliver on that. Whole range of kind of business to business fraud, and it's not uncommon for businesses, and those that are in business will know this, to be very much targeted by other fraudsters, basically. So there is actually a specific set of legislation that we deal with that does deal with what they call misleading marketing between businesses, but effectively unfair trading between businesses. Smuggled goods, so as I've talked about earlier, so things like tobacco and cigarettes. Money laundering, I've previously mentioned scams, online fraud, and then one of the things that was touched upon tonight was this issue basically of illegal money lending. And in mentioning that, we are very much aware and alert to the fact that basically we are considering actively as a service some of the risks that residents may face as a result of the pressures coming through on cost of living, and illegal money lending being one of those. So what are the issues of scams, and what does that normally entail? Well, there's a whole range of those, and obviously the most common one is kind of online phishing exercises, but telephone scams, text messages. We've all received these text messages. There are still people caught up in the direct mailing frauds that go on. So once you're into the system, particularly with direct mailing frauds, you do tend to become repeat victims of that. And we have seen that many times, where people basically are targeted from mailings from all over the world, and it still happens. And we know that the information is shared because we've seen examples where they may have 50 or 100 different sources of mail coming into them, but with the same, for example, typos and addresses. So it shows that basically the lists are actually shared. And then more recently, the romance fraud, and we've done a fair bit of work around that, including some work on local regional television as well. So what are we doing about things like scams? Well, just in the last full year, 21-22, we've supported 42 victims locally in Wokingham. And that type of support can be a whole range of things, from working with families, things like helping them by diverting mail if it's mail related stuff, but to more practical stuff such as the fitting of call blockers and door cams. So just moving on, Narinder, I think these next 2 or 3 slides are yours. If I could just hand over to you, if you may, please.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Good evening, everybody. I'm Narinder Brar. I'm the Community Safety Lead for the Borough, and work very closely with Sean's public protection training standards in terms of delivering some of these responses to the things that Sean's just covered off here. So just to give members a bit of a feel in terms of the numbers of victims that we're talking about, and I think something to really put on the outset here is that this is a really underreported area of crime and incidents. So where we do get reports, and the police do get reports, it's often through third-party reporting. So it will be where a family member or a neighbour or somebody has learnt, or a professional indeed has learnt that this has taken place. So for the data that's available for the borough, between January and December 21, we've had 161 individuals that were victims of fraud-related offences. So across that broad range of work streams and spans of incidents that Sean's covered there, we had 161. And some individuals, of course, sadly have been repeat victims more than once. So examples really where Sean's said around these lists that go sort of repetitively around fraudsters and fraud organisations and sold sort of again and again. So some people find themselves repeat victims. And victims were predominantly, possibly not very surprising to members, in the older age bracket. So between the ages of 70 and 84 actually represented over almost 40% of the fraud-related victims that were reporting offences. When we had a look at the data, we saw that males were slightly overrepresented, so they made up slightly the higher number of victims, and where we did know the ethnicity and it was recorded, 60% for the Woking Borough were white British. So, there we go, brilliant. So we also break the data down further then, just to have a look by the neighbourhoods in the borough, and sort of as the graph shows, Wokingham Town had the most amount of offences recorded, followed closely by Woodley and then Fields, and then also the Early area, and then the rest of the sort of neighbourhoods there are as the diagram shows. And then this is just a sort of victim breakdown in terms of pictorially displaying that information that I've already given around the age brackets. So as we can see there, the ages there predominantly are between 70 and 89. So hand back to yourself, Sean.
Thank you. Sorry, have I got control button or into?
You should have.
Can you, sorry, did you mind just doing that?
Press on the screen, maybe. I think that's how I got it to work.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so just really quickly to talk about how we're geared up to this. Well, basically we have really five units of the service that contribute towards this. First of all, we have the Trading Standards Community Team. So this is the team that deal with effectively first responses. So we have an operating model with the police, where we work alongside them, and if we get notified, for example, of an incident of doorstep-related crime or what we may term road trader-related crime, and that is still in progress, and we aim to basically attend that straight away, basically, as a service. So that would be the highest priority. We would intend to go straight out there, basically, and see what's actually going on and where necessary to deal with the situation and on occasions gather evidence. We then basically have a specialist investigation team that primarily just deal with financial related, not financial related, but fraud and unfair trading related crime. And they tend to deal with crime where you've got multiple victims, and nowadays, of course, where it crosses borders. And what we do find, basically, so the Trading Standards Service for the borough also covers the district of West Berkshire and the borough also of Bracknell, that it's not unusual to have victims in two or three, in all three areas, basically. So they will deal with these kind of what's called level 2, level 3 crimes, and take those forward. Then alongside that, we also have within the service 3 financial investigators. So when I talk about financial investigators, I'm talking about people who are actually authorised by the National Crime Agency to conduct money laundering investigations, and where appropriate to carry out confiscation investigations following basically criminal proceedings where basically a conviction has been secured. We then have a specialist case management unit that works across 3 authorities, but obviously clearly as part of that service is the needs of Woking residents, and in that unit are lawyers that are actually specialists in both regulated but in general crime. And that would include basically people who are experts in both proceeds of crime work, the financial investigator type work, but also fraud and unfair trading. And all of this is supported by an intelligence unit. So kind of what does it look like really on the ground? Well, so we use a thing that we call the National Intelligence Model. And the way that we tend to approach things is to look at it from 3 aspects in particular. We have a strategic assessment that tells us what's going on in the borough. We have a control strategy that tells us how we're going to deal with it. But the approach we take is to look at things from the point of view of preventative measures that we can take. So these are things like public awareness, doorstep crime patrols. And then we also very much look at it from the point of view of intelligence. Now, the biggest source of intelligence to us as a service is the public. You know, we really need the public to come forward and tell us basically where they have concerns about something that may be happening to them, or where it may be happening to their neighbours or to their friends or to their family. It doesn't really matter basically whether you know, whether there is any law being broken necessarily, but if we can look at it for them and we can give them an indication basically as to whether there is anything kind of untoward going on. So we really need that intelligence from the public and from other sources, and we get that also from people like the police and also from elected members as well, basically, who work within communities and are able to feed back to us concerns that have been raised by residents. I've talked about the responses, so things like the rapid action team. Other kind of proactive areas of work include things like no cold calling zones, the work that we do around online investigations. So from time to time, we carry out online investigations into unfair trading. A good example of that recently, in the last very topical example in the last 2 or 3 years, was in relation to the sale of puppies. For example, where we knew that basically during the lockdown periods, during the COVID pandemic period, there was almost a substantive rise, basically an exponential rise in the sale of puppies. Now, obviously, with that, basically, it's attracted those people that were perhaps unlicensed. It attracted people who were supplying false information, were supplying even in some cases false documentation around that, which led to a number of investigations and also led in due course to a number of prosecutions. Intelligence is really important, as we pointed out, that we have an integrated operating model with TVP for dealing with doorstep crime incidents, and I'm just about to embark on another round of awareness raising sessions with police response and also neighbourhood teams, and then of course working with key partners, as Narinda's already alluded to. So there are 2 or 3 case studies. They're in the pack that you've got. I won't necessarily go through this, but these are just ones from really very recent times, and I just included them in this presentation because, as I say, they have taken place basically over the last few months. But you can see the type of thing that we're talking about there. So in this case, a trader that was sentenced to 15 months imprisonment, suspended for 18 months in order to pay 7,200 compensation. Another one, basically, which was a property management company convicted of unfair trading in this particular case, ordered to pay compensation of 10,500, as 10,800, sorry, as well as given a community order. And finally, basically, a locksmith company, which was based outside the area, but where, in fact, the victims were in the area, basically, and they were fined 4,500, ordered to pay compensation and prosecution costs. So I'll stop there, Chair, and I'm very happy to answer any questions. But as I say, we are very conscious with what's going on in the wider world right now. That basically we target the interventions and resources that we've got to make sure that the situation that people currently face is not made any worse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to start with Gregor, because he's the one who asked for this to come forward. So, Gregor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Narinda and Sean, for your session. I really appreciate it. As Peter has said, I was the person that originally asked for this session, and I find it hugely reassuring, the action that our council has taken. The reason why I asked for this session, Narinda, I'm sure you remember, is because earlier on this year, I found out that my octogenarian uncle had been the victim of fraud. And as the year has gone on, and particularly since he passed earlier this year, I have found out that the fraud that he was a victim of has actually multiplied in numerous different areas. So not only was he the victim of a rogue trader, he also managed to get himself onto one of the lists that you referred to, Sean, and a lot of groups posing as religious groups have managed to get quite a significant sum of money from him. And as his mail has been forwarded to me over the last few months, I have seen increasing numbers of letters from them all requesting additional donations for him. In fact, last week I managed to get 3 in one day from one of the organisations. The challenge that I have is that the council that he was under had taken no action whatsoever, and in fact they could have prevented it if they just kind of joined a few dots up. So I guess my questions to you is, and as the cost of living crisis is going to accelerate as well, what else can we do, and what other communication channels can we put out there in order to make sure that anybody that thinks that they may have been a victim of fraud, and particularly the families of people who may have been a victim of fraud, know exactly what it is that they can do in order to report that fraud and have action taken against it? I was hugely fortunate in that I had access to a lot of the officers within our own council and other agencies that I could go to and ask advice from, and they were fantastic in helping me point me in the right direction. But most residents don't. So what can we do on that particularly to make sure? And then my other question for you is around small business fraud, because I know that a lot of small businesses, particularly ones that are manufacturers of products, are seeing a rising number of people passing themselves off as legitimate agencies for those businesses, selling product and then never delivering on them, or delivering fake goods. So again, what can we do as a council to help small businesses on a proactive basis to make sure that they know exactly where they can go when they think they have been a victim of fraud themselves, so that they can then take action?
Thank you. So if I just pick up on in fact, the answer almost to the same to the question, both parts of the question is almost the same. I think the key thing really for me here basically is this issue of understanding and awareness and knowing where to take these things. And it's really, really important that basically that not just all elements of the council work together to deal with this, basically, but elements of other community support organisations. So we've talked about people, we've had people who support people in here tonight. There's people like Citizens Advice. They will hear some of this stuff coming through their doors, and it's really, really important that it's joined up. Going back to the model of delivery, that's why we very much have this approach around basically this preventative action. So there is preventative action, which is physical intervention, maybe as a property, but also basically awareness raising, and people need to understand that basically they can raise these things, and I hope in the borough here that they could raise them having the confidence to know that basically the services provided by the council and the training standard service provided by the council there would actually respond to that in the same way as basically services like Narinda's would. It's the same with business as well. I mean, it is really about it is about awareness, but I have seen some some significant frauds and in situations of unfair trading perpetrated on small businesses. And as you say, basically including ripping off basically products. People talk about, well, why does intellectual property matter? What does it matter if X is showing whatever in the local pub? The bottom line is, without intellectual property rights, without basically a value to those products, there isn't really a business there. As we see every day, every week, if you watch Dragon's Den, they talk about the importance of this stuff and the protection of this stuff. It's what drives innovation as well. So all of this is important in the mix. I just want to say one point about the point you were talking about, what you're seeing coming through your letterbox now. This is exactly basically what we have seen time and time again. I've been in situations where we've worked with relatives when they've discovered, for example, a relative has died or something like that, and we've removed 5-10 bin bags of letters from people's homes. And once you're in that loop, you can become, it's very, very easy to become a repeat victim, to be drawn into this. And in the end, basically, for many people, sadly, it does affect them. It affects their health, and it can affect them, even in cases that we've seen, affects their ability to even live on their own. They lose confidence. This is really important stuff, and it goes way, way beyond the offending itself, basically to the life effects of the individuals, and it's very important for the various elements of the council to work together, basically, to tackle that.
Okay, thank you. Adrian, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation and all the work that you're doing. I think I think you sound like you're really committed to this, and you're really trying to do the best things for the residents and the council. So that's fantastic. As I think the information you gathered and the way you presented it is interesting, but it's not really what I'm looking for. You know, what we had a presentation from the police not long ago where they were talking about the different types of crime, and there were really significant numbers arising from COVID around cybercrime and crime that was related to more on the technology side. So I would be very interested, rather than knowing whether they're in Twyford or whether they're 18 to 25, I would be very interested to know what type of fraud these particular cases are relating to, and whether you're seeing an increase in change in the type of fraud, which is, I think, what we would all expect, right? Because, you know, these guys are constantly morphing and changing their business models. So what is the type of fraud that's being executed? In terms of your cases, you're talking about 161 cases, I think it is. I always want to see a bit beyond numbers into how many new cases, how many cases in progress, successful resolutions of cases closed, backlog of cases. So little more information about the process in terms of KPIs. Then I want you to think about customer success. What you have is some very powerful case studies, right? Some very good examples, but we don't hear from the consumer. We don't hear from the person being perpetrated by this fraudulent activity. I think it would be even more powerful if you could gather some feedback from the people where there's been a successful case. And the final question, and this is not meant in the way it may sound, do you have the right team? Because I got the feeling, talking to the police, they were talking about a massive increase in cybercrime and then talking about boots on the ground. You know, do you have the right team to cope with these different types of cyber, etc., fraud that are happening now and, you know, we all guess are going to proliferate into the future?
Sorry, thank you. I've got to loosen my voice a bit tonight. If I could start with the last point first. There is no doubt things have changed. You know, I mean, over my time in local government, I am actually a trading standards officer by background. And, you know, back in the day, basically, you know, unfair trading was kind of short weight coal, things like that. Now we're into investigations, basically, where you need a whole range of skills. You need to basically be able to open source investigate basically online, and I'll come back to basically the types of crime in a minute. You need basically to have these financial investigators that can actually go away and get court orders, basically to get hold of things like bank accounts, but to get all sorts of other data that may assist with any kind of money laundering investigation that's going on. And then you need to have the ability to analyse that data. You need to be able to use, as we do often, basically things like computer forensics, where we commission out and we will, following, for example, seizures, send off tech equipment or mobile phones basically to computer forensics people who will basically access the data, and then we need to go through the data. We've had entire cases pretty well which have been proved on the back of things like computer forensics, phone forensics nowadays, and on the trail of money basically that's followed. Because as you can imagine, basically the sophistication of these types of crime, even those that are committed at the door, basically has got more and more sophisticated. You know, lots of use of things like burner phones and things like that. And even in the past, we've used things like other forensics, such as fingerprints and things like that to prove cases. And some authorities have even used things like DNA and things. But going back to the type of crimes that are perpetrated, obviously cyber is one of those areas. And it's not just used basically for perpetrating obvious crimes, such as basically the sale of counterfeit goods and fraud and things like that. But actually, it's also used for other types of crimes. So we know that basically it could include things like fraudulent waste collections or unlicensed waste collections. A lot of that stuff basically has appeared on social media over time, with people offering those services. And of course, basically, if they're unlicensed, where's the waste going to end up? And then, you know, is that just a one-off, or has it happened multiple times? Is it you know, part of a pattern basically of unfair trading or even fraudulent trading, taking money to take somebody's waste away when you know that you can't actually do that? I've talked about things like the puppies and things like that that were a feature in the last couple of years, but there are always new things. There are always new things, and they very much follow the market. They very much follow where the money is. It's a bit like counterfeiting. You know, the latest big thing will be counterfeited, and we've seen it basically time and time again. So, you know, we know that basically where there is intellectual property value, there's going to be counterfeit goods, there's going to be businesses being ripped off, there's going to be consumers basically being sold low value products, and you're going to see anti-competitive practice as a result of all of that. I'm more than happy, actually, if the committee are minded to. I could talk, as you probably gathered, and I won't, but I could talk a lot about this subject, and I'm happy to come back and talk a bit about the trends. In terms of the statistics, in fact, those aren't the statistics from my service. They are the statistics, actually, Narendra, aren't they, from the police, from Thames Valley Police, but I'm more than happy to come back and talk about what we as a service are seeing in a bit more detail, if that would help the committee.
Okay, what we'll do, we'll come back to you and advise you of that one, bearing in mind our future programme. But I think having a written report of trends would be useful.
Yeah.
Pauline.
Hi, Sean. Just a couple of observations. I mean, I've found trading standards pretty helpful the times I've dealt with them, and not just your trading standards, also the ones in Suffolk. But I've found action fraud under police completely useless. I don't know whether that's something that is just my bad luck, or whether that seems to be a trend. They just don't seem to be interested in things that should be relatively easy to solve. And the other thing that winds me up a bit is the ability to create direct debits on somebody's bank account without, it appears, any evidence whatsoever that you've got any approval. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts about how you deal with that, because if you can't control that, once somebody's got your bank account, they could just keep direct debiting it. You can stop it, but if you're dealing with somebody who's vulnerable and elderly, it's very upsetting for them to find somebody's taken money out of their bank again because they happen to have their bank account without any approval whatsoever.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So just picking up on those points. So starting off with action fraud. I mean, obviously, basically, there is a huge amount of fraud and very, very limited resource. So some of this stuff is picked up and it is investigated by the City of London. Some of it basically is referred through to regional organised crime units. But actually, one of the most useful thing actually that action fraud does is it acts as basically a very important database that we can use when we start investigating basically some of these crimes. Because actually, you know, back in the day, if you go back a few years, I mean, all we had was the ones that were reported to us as a service. Then we had the National Citizens Advice telephone line, basically, which gave us a bit more data. But now, of course, as part of investigations, we'll be able also to interrogate the information that held by action fraud. And from that, we can see that actually there isn't just the one victim in Wokingham, but there may be 5 victims in Wokingham. There may be 50 victims in the southeast. There may be 500 victims in the country. And that really is important to us, basically, in taking forward investigations and showing the true level, basically, of criminality. In terms of the police, I mean, Narendra, maybe you want to answer that, but I do know that the Police and Crime Commissioner, certainly for Thames Valley, one of the priorities this year is fraud. And there is an awful lot of work going on now. Basically, they have set up a unit to look at things like online scams and other frauds. Basically, and they are working jointly with trading standard services across the Thames Valley. But do you want to, Narendra, just pick up on the issue of the police?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, like Sean has said, the Police and Crime Commissioner, Matthew Barber's, one of his priorities is fraud for his police and crime plan for this year and moving forward. So, absolutely, it's recognised as a crime that is of high priority across the whole of the Thames Valley. The point that you pick up on in terms of resourcing and policing is a fair point, and the recognition amongst the police exists that the specialism around investigating fraud offences is very, very complex, and working with trading standards colleagues, and I'm sure Sean will tell you that it is these investigations span not just towns and valley regions and southeast. They're across the nation, they're across Europe, and actually globally. So some of these frauds are committed by somebody sitting thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles away, but could be defrauding somebody in in our borough, and that is often the case. So it's a really, really complex picture. The ability to keep up with fraudsters is just as complicated, because the ability, as with all criminals and organised crime, and actually a lot of crime in terms of fraud and the work that Sean has outlined as part of his investigation work, is very, very complicated, and more importantly, very often linked to organised crime. So counterfeiting, money laundering, all of these things will be in a massive web of other activities such as people trafficking, drugs, counterfeiting of money, guns, cigarettes, so on and so forth. So it's a really, really complex picture. It's not just around a trading standards investigation. It will be part of, and then an international complex picture. So in terms of the resourcing, absolutely, the police recognise that their specialism around this area is something that we need to develop and increase, together with some of the other resourcing challenges that the police have recognised. But hopefully we're making some inroads in that, together with some of the trading standards operations and information that we're sharing in partnership, resources and activity that we're undertaking, but also with the recognition from the Police and Crime Commissioner that it is of a priority for the Thames Valley. It will get some further traction and further prioritisation that it needs, and that time to get those resources behind it.
Okay, thank you.
So can I just come back on the action fraud? Just a quick question.
Yeah, just quick. Let me just finish first. I'm just bearing in the amount of time here. I do want to draw this one to a close shortly, so let's just keep it brief.
So Sean, maybe you could give some advice. If action fraud is actually a body that doesn't actually do anything but collects the data, that's absolutely fine. But they're being badged with the end user as an organisation you can go to get fraud solved. What is the process you should follow?
So there is basically I say what happens is it filters through to various things. So, for example, it filters through some of the more very high-end stuff, filters through to the City of London and the fraud unit up there. Some of it filters through to local police forces such as Thames Valley Police, and some of it basically works its way through to organised crime units, and for people like us, and we use that data. I think action fraud is the fraud reporting route, basically for fraud generally. But what I would say to residents that in Wokingham is that if they feel that they've become the victim of trading related fraud, or people basically pretending to be traders or masquerading as traders, quite often these people aren't really traders, they're fraudsters using trade, basically the facade of trade basically as a way of basically getting into your world, as it were. Then come to us. Come to your local, basically, trading standard service, report it to us, and we will look at it. I mean, we take this stuff as you know, you've worked with us over the years, Councillor Jorgensen. We take this stuff incredibly seriously. I put 2 or 3 cases up there, basically on the thing, but we've had many cases over the years, and some of those sentences there, are dwarfed by some of the 3, 4, 5, 6 year custodial sentences we have had with some of this trade. But as Narinda says, it's a really complex picture. We've gone from.
Sean, can I just
I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll stop there.
Because I've got Shirley asking a question. I think Anne wants one, so we're going to do those really quickly.
Yeah, sure. A couple of things. One is, do you use social media to alert residents when there are, say, gangs of scammers going around doing a particular thing? It occurs to me that I think that would be quite useful, that for councillors to sign up to follow you on Twitter or Facebook to find those things that we could then disseminate among our own communities to say, look, there's a gang of people coming around offering to tarmac your drive or cut down your trees or whatever it happens to be, and don't let them near. So that's one question. And the other thing is, you mentioned no cold calling zones, and I'm kind of thinking, do kind of scammers take any notice of that and think, ooh, I bet not go and scam these people because it's a no cold calling zone? So that's two questions. Thank you.
It's so on the first one, basically, I'm quite happy, Chair. I'll just share around that information about the social media and everything else. On no cold calling zones, this is very much, it's a bit like Neighbourhood Watch. It's very much about awareness and making people think. There is actually basically, however, a legal aspect to this, and without going into too much detail, one of the things that is dealt with in the unfair trading rules, basically, or regulations, the laws around that, is that you're supposed to leave somebody's property when asked to do so, if it's a trading environment. And that's why we have these things, like we provide residents with these stickers and everything else, just saying that we want you to leave the property. We don't wish to basically deal with you in this way. We don't wish to be cold called. And that's part of the basis of that response. But I'll share through through Democratic Services colleagues all the links to the kind of social media stuff and the news feeds that we have. And I would very much welcome kind of member support in terms of feeding that information out to the communities.
Thank you, Sean. Anne.
Yes, good evening. I was just thinking that in terms of online scams, there must be far more scams affecting residents than ever gets reported. To what extent are the elderly sort of contacted or informed proactively about how to handle such scams?
So we actually have a fraud, as Narinda knows, we actually have a fraud victim support officer who does a lot of work around awareness raising. And in fact, we've just put some additional funding, haven't we, Narinda, from the Community Safety Fund into actually growing that capacity. So we do put out positive messages, we do put out proactive messages and information. We go out and do talks, and we go out and do a whole range of kind of community events and things like that. But actually, and then when we become aware of people becoming victims, we then provide that support with the view basically to stop the situation actually deteriorating, or in some cases, and in fact a number of cases, very successfully have managed to recover money for people. But obviously that's quite a hard thing to do, basically, certainly when a lot of the security things may have been bypassed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've just got one sort of closing remark stroke kind of questiony thing. I know we've got, my mother-in-law lives in an old people's home. I know some people who are living in retirement homes. And whilst this presentation came along, I realised 3 of my friends have also been impacted by cyber fraud. So I'm just wondering, do you have a sort of showcase that goes around to old people's homes or enclosed environments to just give these people knowledge?
Absolutely, that's what these officers do. That's what the kind of community fraud support officers do. Basically, they're more than happy, in fact, very happy to go out basically and talk to groups, no matter how large or small. And no matter, any sort of setting that we're invited to, but it is through getting this information out there that we stand the best chance. It's easier to stop somebody becoming a victim than to deal with it once they have become a victim, certainly.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to call an end to this session. So thank you both for the presentation and the interest, and I'm glad to hear that you are doing a lot of stuff in this work, so that's well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the local plan update, which, yes. Okay. Lindsay and Ian. Okay, so thanks for bearing with us. I know we've had a long agenda and you've sat there and waited patiently, so thank you for that. So I don't know which of you wants to speak first.
I'll start. We're here this evening on, I think you want progress on the local plan as to how things are going. I'll deal with any sort of specific aspects that you might want on general issues. Ian will do the technical side of what's working on the local plan. And if you've got any particular issues with social housing, Stephen will be able to do that. When I took on the responsibility of moving the local plan forward, we just done a section 18, I called it, and it's 18, I can never remember the right title, consultation. And there were, earlier this year, some 3,900 responses to that consultation. And there was a lot of work done to go through those responses. And I think virtually every site in the borough that was included in the consultation had people supporting it and people objecting to it. So we had to assess what that meant. There were obviously some that had more complaints than positives, and we've put them in the order that they had, so that we now know where residents of the borough were not keen on sites being provided. Also running in parallel to the local plan is that we have been campaigning on the housing numbers, and the leader of the council has written to two secretaries of states for levelling up over the last few months on this topic, and we continue to push very hard on that. A lot of councils in the southeast are in a similar position as ourselves, but I think we here in Wokingham have taken on a significant number over the last 10 years. The growth of Wokingham between 2011 and 2021 as part of the census is our area grew by over 15%. The average was just over 6%. So we have taken 2.5 times the average growth of houses. We have also found that over the last 4 or 5 years, we have over provided, and there's tables in the document that Ian put together where the houses that were completed has been shown over various years. And you will see that in recent years, we have, I think, consistently delivered over 4 figures. In fact, 1,500, I think, is the highest in 1 year. So what has happened is that as an area, the council area has delivered more than it was asked to do. And as a result, the way the sort of local plan and the MPPF works, it actually hinders us and gives us additional problems, because it keeps on saying to you, well, you built loads of houses, you can take loads more. And that's one of the reasons why, as a council and others in the southeast, have been lobbying on the housing numbers, because we've taken so many that there comes a point when you say, hold on a minute, we need to look at this and review the numbers. So we have been working on that. Today, a number of the cross-party working group visited 4 sites, the 4 largest sites that are currently being proposed by various developers. I found it very interesting, and we are having a question and answer session on Friday with the developers and giving them an opportunity to present to us what they've got, and the members of the working group to ask questions. So I just give you a very see where we're going and the paper that Ian puts together, and maybe now I just move to Ian to expand on what is presented.
Yeah, thank you for the invite this evening. The interest of efficiency, I'll go over the first part of the report, take it as read, and go on to the analysis of issues. But just to clarify what Councillor Ferris has just said, in terms of the draft local plan, we've had a number of consultations. The first few were looking for proposed site nominations, where land was potentially available. And then we went through a number of consultations asking about options and asking open questions of residents as to what the best approach may be. And then we've published 2 plan strategies in terms of the way we would prefer to manage developments. Both of those strategies are based on optimising the urban area, supported by a range of greenfield site releases to meet the government defined housing needs. The first strategy proposed the Graiseley Garden Town proposal between Wokingham and West Berkshire. Unfortunately, that was found to be undeliverable in spite of it being its investigation being supported by the government ultimately because of the expansion emergency planning. And then Councillor Ferris referred to the more recent revised growth strategy, which proposed a range of sites, but the largest was land between Shinfield, Sindlesham and Arborfield as a new strategic development location. And as Councillor Ferris was referred to, we're in a process of reviewing the responses into that consultation and the options available, which is including meeting the promoters of the larger sites to assess which options the council wish officers to consider further and to present their recommendation to executive and potentially full council in the fullness of time. In terms of the analysis of issues, one of the key aspects will be housing need as the most significant land use. Housing need at the moment is calculated by a standard method the government set out, and stepping away from that method is very difficult. You have to prove exceptional local circumstances. Now, and I should say that means something has to be uncommon nationally and effectively either through being unusual or the scale of its impact on this particular borough. And we haven't at the moment, having taken advice of external experts, found reasons which we believe would help step away from the government standard method. You will have read in recent times, no doubt, statements from government ministers about changing the planning system. There have been changes suggested coming down the line. At this time, there's no details of what they might be or timetable behind what they might be. So I and my team are working on the current rules of national guidance as you would expect. Just moving on through the issues. One of the key challenges for the borough is where we judge land to be suitable. There are few smaller sites found to be assessed as suitable at a technical level across the borough. And so the approach of having larger strategic developments with it supported by its own infrastructure is assessed to be the most sustainable approach. The other aspects of the local plan in terms of the land supply is around how the 5-year land supply works, which I know is of particular interest to this committee. And that's an area of planning policy and guidance at a national level, which is not satisfactory, in my opinion. We find ourselves in a relatively unique position whereby rules which were designed to deliver more housing permissions through the system where plans are failing to deliver housing is actually impacting us as an authority where we have delivered housing earlier than necessarily required, and that has reduced our bank of planning permissions, which Councillor Ferris referred to. Unfortunately, the way government guidance is set up is it's silent on that issue, and the premise of their resetting principle in how they calculate housing need means that oversupply is not something we can take into account in the calculation of the 5-year housing land supply position. What we do indicate is that when weighing into account the shortfall of land supply in the borough, it is one of the factors that needs to be taken on board and should be used to temper effectively the weight placed on granting planning permission for new homes. And that's been something we've managed to persuade several planning inspectors of, which I'm glad to say. However, that will not resolve the issue. That's managing the position for the borough. It would be much better if we had clearer national policy and guidance, and that's where the political lobbying is very important for this authority. Just very lastly, by the way of introduction, the local plan is not just about putting housing in particular places. There are some very important things new policies can do. Councillor Conway's here about affordable homes and social housing where people need support to access suitable homes, which comes into the previous items we've heard this evening, and trying to support those who do find themselves in need. There are also other aspects such as increasing energy performance of buildings and trying to address the climate change challenge, for example. So planning can potentially, if we have the evidence, go beyond building regulations to improve things in a positive way for our residents as well. Unfortunately, the plan moves as fast as the slowest aspect. So although a number of the things I'm talking about, I'm sure would be agreed quite happily across parties, the local plan is a single entity, so it goes at the speed of the most challenging issue. Which unfortunately is how to meet long-term development needs. So all the more positive aspects that we could do, such as those energy performance and biodiversity considerations, are caught up in that timeline. But with that, that's a very brief synopsis through the report, really. I should say very happy to take questions this evening. I would say if any questions come up on the technicalities post tonight, of course, given the time, I'd be very happy to help outside this meeting as well.
Just a footnote, if I may, relating to affordable and social housing. In essence, the borough faces two big housing challenges. One that we're all familiar with is the imposition of what we, I think, across the board believe are unsustainably large numbers of new dwellings that the government is imposing on us, which obviously has potentially very serious implications for infrastructure, already congested roads, already overstretched local facilities, medical facilities, schools, and obviously a very real impact on countryside. That's the familiar one. The less familiar one is that we would need half of the new housing that was allocated to us to be affordable and social housing if we were to meet genuine local need. All of our housing needs assessments show that around about 50% of that housing would have to be affordable or social. And in an area like ours, with high property prices, affordable is often not affordable at all, because it's essentially a discount on a market house. And with even with the government's new First Home scheme, which is coming into play soon, the discounts will still mean that this is unaffordable to many people. So one of the things we are trying to do is increase the proportion of affordable and social housing in the total housing mix in the new local plan. And we're trying also to maximise the amount of social rental housing within that affordable and social housing mix, because that's where the need is most acute. So we've got two very different challenges. One, the overall housing numbers, which we're all concerned are too high. But two, the need within that housing number to maximise the amount we can get in terms of affordable and social housing. But the problem we have there, we could decide in our new local plan that we wanted to fix the figure at 50%. But we're also trying to secure from developers highways improvements, contributions to school places, biodiversity net gain, all sorts of additional things we're trying to get from developers. And there will come a point, obviously, where we have to prove viability. We have to prove, not to ourselves, but to the local plan inspector, that what we're coming up with is viable. Otherwise, he'll just strike it out and say that's not appropriate. So we have to, it's a delicate balancing act. We've got to push as far as we can go, but not go further than is realistic.
Thank you. Two questions from me. What is the timeline we're working to, and how do we speed it up? I don't think anyone wants the local plan to be sort of non-existent for a day longer than it needs to be. So is it a question of resources, time, but what can we do to speed that up? And the second question is, if at some point the government does change the housing number, let's say 2 or 3 years down the road and we've got a local plan in place, can we go back and adjust the numbers?
In terms of the timing, the detailed programme, I must confess there is not currently a detailed timetable. We are required to produce a local development scheme which sets out key milestones for the production of the local plan. However, at the moment, I have not sought to do that from my team on the basis that we are currently at an early stage of discussing the direction the strategy might take. In essence, there are two options before the council. One would be to move directly to a Regulation 19 consultation, which is the stage before you submit your plan for examination. And obviously that would be the quickest programme through. The other route would be to undertake another Regulation 18 consultation, which is a consultation within the council's control, in essentially, before moving on to Regulation 19 and submit. Now, the reason I say I don't have a detailed timetable yet is we are discussing through the cross-party member working group the direction the plan might take and reviewing options. Once we have done that work, officers will be in a position to make a technical recommendation to members. If that technical recommendation is accepted and that the technical recommendation is in line with previous consultations, I would recommend going straight to Regulation 19 and going on through examination. If, however, the technical recommendation from officers was to change, or the technical recommendation from officers was the same, but members wished to take a different route and choose a different option, then I would recommend going through a further Regulation 18 consultation before moving on. And a further Regulation 18 consultation will effectively add on approximately a year to the process. Not quite a year, but for the sake of this evening, we'll just call it a year. So I would like to set out a detailed consultation, a detailed milestone of the programme. However, we need to get to a position where I can make a recommendation into a council committee as to the progress. And from that point, I can say what the recommendation would be in terms of the process. So at the moment, I've not set out a programme. However, I have put in the report an idea as to the timeline each of those processes might take. So just into the report, at the top of one of the pages where it says climate change. Hang on, I'm on the wrong one, sorry. So at the bottom of page 34, there's a paragraph which talks about the direction of the local plan and the submission. And if you continue over to the top of page 35, then if the plan was to proceed directly to Regulation 18, then I'd expect to be able to submit a plan in the first half of the monitoring year 23-24, which is from March that starts, or from April, sorry, that starts. If you were to go to Regulation 19, then effectively it would be delayed to late next year or early the year after. But as I said, the first question is what is the technical recommendation into members, and we've started that process and review again. And then the secondary question is whether members wish to accept that recommendation or whether they wish to take a different route.
I think it's important to emphasise, David, that progress has been slowed down because we already have had to go through 2 Regulation 18 consultations because, of course, we had a draft local plan that included Graiseley, which was struck out essentially by the Ministry of Defence objecting, and the exclusion zone effectively rendering that impossible to develop. So we've had to go back to the drawing board once already, and that has really already protracted the process.
So can I just touch the other part of that question in, which was about what happens if the housing numbers change in the future? Can we readdress?
Yes, sorry, skipped over that one. In essence, a local plan is, or local authorities are required to review their local plan every 5 years, regardless of whether there are changes in numbers. So a local authority can choose to review its local plan at any time, but it must do effectively every 5 years. That review doesn't necessarily lead to an update, but you're meant to go through a process of considering whether the plan needs to be updated and in the case of finding it does start that process. If you don't, you have clear position statement saying we don't feel the need to update it at this stage. So if the housing requirements or indeed any other significant requirement was to happen in the plan, there would be a question to ask ourselves as to whether that in itself would trigger a review, or whether you could wait a few years before understanding that work. If the number was to come down, then the question would be, do we wish to review our plan? In those circumstances, it may be an option to remove development sites from the plan, or at least turn them into reserve sites for longer term use, or it might be appropriate, for example, just to extend the time frame of the plan to add years on to take account of that extra housing. But yes, the housing number is not set forever. We have the opportunity to review it when material circumstances change.
Lindsay, did you want to say something else? Or?
No, I think.
Okay. Shelley. Okay, Polly.
Thank you. Thanks. Couple of questions. One a bit detailed, and I'll give you that one first. I understood that, and I might be wrong, so please correct me if I'm wrong, that there's something like 20% contingency in the calculated planned numbers that we get from government. I wondered if that contingency could be adjusted, because it's apparently meant to be a contingency for under delivery. So if we've got a record of over delivery, could we take that 20% out, or could we argue for that? That's the first sort of detailed question. The second question is, could you just confirm? I noticed that you say in the paper on page 38 that you've got a deadline of December 2023 for this plan. Now, I believe we were in line to do that before the election, but now are not. Could you please confirm the implications of not meeting that deadline on the residents and on infrastructure and on planning, please?
Certainly, and I'll try and remember to answer. So I'll try and answer both questions this time rather than forget one. In terms of the first question, it's actually quite straightforward. So when calculating local housing needs, you get a fixed number, which is currently 781 for the borough. When we have to look at our deliverable housing land supply, or the 5-year land supply test, we are required to add a buffer onto that effectively the minimum is to allow flexibility in the market, and that buffer is 5%. If you have a history of under delivery and there are rules setting what that means, then you have to have a buffer of 20% onto that number, effectively forcing an authority to bring forward more land to try and ensure the market has options. This authority applies the 5% minimum buffer, so we're not a 20% buffer authority, I'm pleased to say. So the plan itself doesn't have the contingency in, but how you monitor the plan has to have a buffer. At the moment, as an authority that has been hitting targets consistently, we apply the minimum buffer. Some authorities around us where housing supply has been more patchy, shall we say, then they have to have a bigger buffer, which gives them a much larger challenge to ensure that supply. But we're a good performing minimum buffer authority. In terms of the December 2023 deadline, yes, the local plan programme was aiming to have the plan substantially progressed by December 2023. I think it would have been a push to get it adopted by 2023. However, our current or the last local development scheme was seeking to have the plan substantially through its examination by December 2023, and that would limit any potential interventions in legislation by the government, if I call it that. The programme and risk of intervention for the authority going forwards, I think, is a matter of debate. There is legislation available to allow the government to direct a local authority or potentially intervene in plan making process. The government have generally not intervened in local authorities where progress is being made. So provided the authority has a programme which is being followed and progress is being made, then I would suggest the track record is one that the government would be satisfied and not introduce anything on this authority. If an authority was to stop working towards its local plan or potentially withdraw from a local plan process entirely, then there is a risk of intervention. The most recent example of that was from Oxfordshire, where the authority had actually gone through much of its local plan process, but indicated it was willing or wanting not to adopt the plan, having passed examination. And in those circumstances, the Secretary of State intervened to stop the authority making that decision, and mooted options of giving the responsibility of the plan, say, the county council, or deciding as a Secretary of State themselves. As it happens, that intervention was effective from the Secretary of State's position, in that the Oxfordshire authority concerned reconsidered its decision and decided to adopt its plan, albeit they have chosen, I think, to undertake an early review going forward. So there are possibilities of intervention, but they are sparingly used, provided there is a programme going forwards.
That wasn't quite the question. The question is, if because we haven't adopted the plan, we have therefore not got a 5-year land supply, what's the risk in terms of planning applications from developers, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of approvals, or in terms of the protection of Greenbelt?
I'll take part of what you said, because the timescales, as I mentioned when I spoke at the beginning, is that we had 3,900 responses. And I also mentioned that there were a number of sites where the local residents had significant concerns about that particular site. And as councillors, it is our role to look at what the residents have told us as to what the previous consultation was proposing. And it's clear that there are as I say, there are a number, 4, 5, 6 sites which are distinctly not popular with lots of residents here. And it isn't our role to go through to see if we can find, in certain cases, maybe alternative sites which are also sustainable, and to put those to the council at some point. And that, by definition, requires us to have a review of what was currently put together. And that is the issue that has been focusing on our minds here, because we want to meet the best needs for the council and our residents. And there are technical issues that we have to follow, and there are procedures that we have to follow, and that is what we intend to do.
Yes, certainly. To be absolutely blunt, we've now entered a position where we do not have a technical 5-year housing land supply as set out in the report. At the moment, we are arguing that oversupply should temper the weight that is applied to that, and have been broadly successful. But in terms of the absence of a 5-year housing land supply and having to make decisions under that tilted balance, then that will effectively exist now until a new local plan is adopted. So clearly, if the local plan programme was to slow or not be pursued, then that would extend the period that tilted balance would apply. And under the tilted balance, it isn't a free-for-all in all locations. You're still able to make planning judgments over planning applications. However, the emphasis is very much tilted onto why you can't grant planning permission. And it can be expected that under that regime, the authority will lose some planning appeal processes where its judgment was to refuse and an inspector's judgment was to allow. And I would expect the number that the authority would lose to be higher than we might otherwise normally achieve. I'm not able to quantify that, but in essence, the longer the local plan programme takes to adoption, the longer that period of tilted balance in decision making would apply.
Shirley. Microphone.
Sorry, I thought I'd done it. Sorry. One is about the local planners as a whole, not so much in terms of housing numbers, but how much control we have over what developers do once there is a site that's been made available to them. And I'm thinking in terms of things like telecoms infrastructure, masts and base stations, fibre optic cable, that kind of thing, which always seems to be an add-on. And, you know, as councillors, we get these situations where somebody, say, want to put in a 5G base station and then there's uproar, the residents don't want it, nobody wants it near them. And it occurs to me that if things like that were put into sites at the beginning and it was written into the plan that those things had to be considered at the outset, my question is that a possibility? And similarly, we get a lot of developments where there are hundreds and hundreds of houses, but there's no community space. There's no kind of focal point to the community. So they lack community cohesion. There's nowhere where children can go to the brownies, or there's no place locally where there can be a mother and toddler group. So communities, those are the things that build communities. And I just wonder whether we have any power over including that. And then I've got another question, which is just to do with the borough design guide. And is that going to be updated alongside the local plan? Because that's also wildly out of date, given all the permitted development rules that have changed over the years. And that causes a lot of consternation as well. So thank you.
Just touching on on telecoms and fibres, the answer is, do we have control? Not absolutely, but we can update our policies as proposed, actually, to try and ensure utilities are in early, and those utilities go in a sensible fashion, including fibre. And we do take steps now to encourage those services to go in before we've laid the surface of our strategic development sites, for example. So we very much try to operate the dig once, cover once sort of approach. We don't have the ability to stop someone going in afterwards, but we do try and encourage that, so it's not necessary. And there are steps we can try and build into the plan to make digging up of pavements and roads less likely. Even simple things like utilities management plans to make sure that the utilities don't cross the roads too frequently, so there's less opportunities for things to go wrong that may inhibit the movement of vehicles or cycles or pedestrians, for example. So there are tools we can use, but I can't say it's absolute control. And in terms of where someone does wish to go back, most of that is permitted development rights, as you referred to, which the ability of the council to manage that again is limited, but we do very much try to be proactive to stop these unnecessary works happening. In terms of the Borough Design Guide, the simple answer is yes, it will be updated. So the local plan is your primary document, which sets your key planning policies, but that will need to be supported by a number of supplementary guidance which provide detail to how those policies will be implemented. The Borough Design Guide is a key aspect of that. So when we have updated strategic planning policies, the idea is, yes, we will do an update to the Borough Design Guide and indeed a number of other supplementary documents as well to bring them up to date. If there is a particular issue in a current guide that you wish to raise with me, then please do outside of this meeting. In that, I'm very happy, because some of our guides we may be able to update efficiently now. So whilst there will be a holistic review in the future, if there's a particular issue now you wish to raise with me, then we can look at to see whether it's possible to do something in the shorter term and whether our policies would allow us to do that.
Okay, thank you. And
Microphone.
sorry, you said that we want to go higher on our percentage of social rented in developments, and what percentage are you aiming for?
Surely, to answer your question, we're going to have to go back to the viability test before we can come up with any certainty about what the figure would be. My aspiration is 50%. That may not be achievable. So anything between the current 35% and 50% will be an improvement. And we have to weigh up, as I said, all of these different competing demands that we're going to be imposing on developers. I'm not suggesting we should be weeping at the predicament of the developers, but we have to get this past the the local plan inspector. So we've got to try and present a robust case for a higher figure being viable. But our aspiration is to get up to 50. That may not be achievable, but we will be seeking to go above the 35 we have at the moment.
Lindsay?
Come back on borough design. On the borough design guide, the cross-party working group that's mentioned, we've already raised this issue as being one of those areas that we want to have updated. And as Ian has mentioned, it will be sort of progressive as we go through the system, and then when we get to a particular point, we'll be able to update and incorporate them. We've had lots of discussion of including allowances for climate change and energy use and everything else that we've had, environmental impact. We started having discussions on that, and we'll have more, and they will then become embedded into the new local plan. So that we're building a future proof, as I would call it, to make sure that we're getting everything as best we can, so that we've got the properties ahead of the game as best we can. When you raise the issue about we're talking with developers, there's a lot of discussions that the officers will have with the developers on a particular site, and all those sorts of things, like whether we've got a community hall, whether we've got a school or whatever, all gets put into that plan. Some work out better than others, and that's the part of the problem. Some developers are better than others, but we have had, I think, quite a good experience, because we now have a team in the council under Connor who deals with the SDL side of things, and they work very closely with the developers, and at least 2 of the sites have done really well, but not on all. But it's an area that we're learning and gaining more knowledge as to make sure that how we go through, that we make sure that the development proposal actually is fit for purpose. And that's part of the working out the assessment of the sites and sustainability and everything else that's mentioned.
Just a brief footnote to that. Placemaking, which is what you're really talking about, is absolutely central to the approach we want to adopt. Placemaking. It's about creating cohesive communities with facilities locally available, so that people don't have to travel long distances to get to facilities. That's really an important feature. It's got to be an important feature of the local plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you get a development of, say, 700 houses and there's nothing, there's no shop, there's nothing at all, just 700 houses, there's no bus that passes through it or anything like that, and no community feel at all. And I think it's just really sad, and they're never going to develop into proper communities.
Wanting to move away from that.
Adrian?
Thanks for coming to present, Ian and Lindsay and Stephen. And I completely understand your comments and what you're trying to get at. But, you know, we've been promised a local plan for years and years and years. We still haven't got one. The document is way out of date. What the residents say to me when I go talk to them is, when is it going to be updated? When are we going to get a new one? When are we going to get better borough guidelines? We all understand the consequences of not providing a local plan. These are significant. We have to move forward with urgency and momentum. And one of the things that's missing from this report is a feeling of progress to date. I understand there's lots of critical meetings, critical decisions to happen. But in the end, I see this as, you know, well, it's clearly not a popularity contest because nobody's going to be popular delivering a local plan, right? But it should be a negotiation around sites, and there should be a feeling from here. You know, are we 50% there? Are we 20% there? Are we 0% there? In my view, I want to know how far down the road are we? When are we going to get to that 2023 deadline or not? Is that disappearing into the distance, or are we putting the momentum and urgency into this, and are we making significant progress? And the progress is X, Y, and Z. That's one aspect. One aspect is obviously the residents say to me, you know, we want significant change from the 2010 plan. Place is a really great point. Significant improvements in terms of infrastructure. They don't want to see these estates with nothing in them. Transformational improvements on climate change is what residents have asked, you know, on many occasions. Many people are involved in climate emergency and thinking about this, and we have a highly intelligent set of residents, as everybody in this room knows. And my final question, and this is the crux of it really, you know, have we been not playing the game very well? It sounds like we've always been too open and honest, and we've set things up in a way where we've over-delivered, and now we're penalised because we're over-delivered. Is there a better way to play the game? That's my question.
The game is played by developers. Developers are part of this process. They determine pace and things like this as well. And this is one of the challenges. That over delivery early on isn't because there was a fault in earlier plans. It's because of the rate of delivery by developers, and it's in their interest to deliver early.
Yeah, but what I mean is chopping the puzzle into pieces and only letting the pieces go. So changing the phasing. That's my point.
Could I? It's starting to. Can I take your second and third points? You mentioned that residents have said that they want changes. To get changes of any significance in the local plan, following on from the consultation, as we put in the report, we've got either going through to the Regulation 19 stage, which is basically taking the consultation that went through earlier this year, you know, 95% as to what went and better, or we take a look at what the residents want, which is that they want some changes. And we are in the process of looking at that aspect. We were out today visiting 4 sites. It's a shame the opposition didn't go, but that's beside the point. But we have looked at 4 sites today. We're going to ask a lot of questions, or they'll come and present to us on Friday, and we will be asking questions of them. We have to look, they are the 4 biggest sites that developers have put forward in the borough. So therefore, we have to look at them to see whether they are sustainable and whether they are viable. And then we go through that process, and that will be done on the viability and sustainability of those sites. It will be done on that independent basis. So to meet your requirement of meeting your residents' needs, we need to go through that process. That, by definition, requires us to go through, if we get a larger change, to go through another Regulation 18 consultation. And that would mean that it would take approximately a year longer. The figures for the 5-year land supply are calculated at the 31st of March every year. And they've just come in, and the figure's been mentioned that we're below 5. That is based upon a figure that existed in March of this year. So, you know, one's inherited a situation where you didn't have a 5-year land supply. So I have got to try and go through and meet the needs of the residents to produce a viable local plan. and at the expedited rate that we can go, depending upon how we go. And at the moment, we are looking at whether there are other sites that may be able to achieve, in conjunction, which I still feel is the most important thing we are here, is the volume. And we need the government to get their act together and come up with a proposal as what they do to treat the likes of Woking and Borough fairly. We have been, as I mentioned earlier on, we have had a 15% growth in population. The average across the country is just over 6%, 2.5 times the basic requirement of almost anywhere around the country. The government has got a levelling up scheme where they want to go further north in the Midlands. And I think a lot of people in this country support that, because there are parts of this country who have been crying out for houses for years. We are an area which has been we've oversupplied, we have tremendous demand, but ironically, our local needs have hardly dropped. We've built loads and loads of houses. It's not necessarily the right type of houses that have got built, but they've got built because of discussions, and the tilt is in favour of the developers. And it's now we've got to get a change to that. We've got to get an identification that the housing numbers for an area is applicable to that area and not just based upon some formula. The 5-year land supply, as Ian quite rightly described earlier on, in theory is designed to help councils who are not developing. And I don't disagree that if somebody is not developing, they should have be knocked. But it's not the case. This part of the country in Wokingham, I was on the planning committee in 2015, just before the change from the main bit being the delivery of costs that we get from Section 106 to the new SIL, right? We had planning committee after planning committee during January, February, March, and even the 31st of March 2015. And we approved loads of developments because there was no reason. So that was when we had that core. And the developers, as Stephen said, did that because Section 106 was cheaper to them than SIL. And they did it because it was their benefit. Then when they all got their approval, the developers control the delivery of what they do. They're not going to, the point. Can I just finish? They are not going to deliver houses unless they know they can sell them. There is an element of 1 or 2 developers actually did some social housing because they found they got some money from the council to do that, but the vast majority was doing it. So the control of delivery, and therefore this 5-year land supply, it's the 5-year land supply is because we've delivered.
If in terms of playing the game better, what I'm also trying to think of here, and you're saying the developers are in control of everything. If we were to give WBC planning permission on their sites for WBC, then WBC could control the delivery of those units. If WBC put planning permission on a developer site for, I don't know, a solar farm, then the developer wouldn't be able to deliver and execute according to his delivery. This is what I'm talking about in terms of playing the game better, taking more control of our plan away from the developer, actually.
Can I just bring a halt to that? I know I can see where you're going, but that is an offline discussion to have. Yes, we've got other questions. So yeah, moving on to Anne, please.
Thank you. So I've got 3 questions. One is, I was wondering, are a significant number of the landowners in working in the borough actually developers? That is, owning land which could be developed. So it's a significant amount of the land that can possibly be developed, already owned by developers. As regards the Hall Farm development or any other big development, would there also be a new secondary school? Because we seem to have got an huge pressure on secondary school places in some areas, and it seems to be quite difficult to get a new secondary school sort of into place because there's such big things. And then the other thing is, will any new development have a way of separating out rainwater from general sewage to try and help with the awful problems we're having with the processing of sewage? And is it ensured that utilities like water will be adequate for any new development, and not just, you know, hopeful, wishful thinking sort of thing? Thank you.
I can answer those really quite quickly. Going in order. In terms of landowners, in terms of land that's promoted to us, and virtually all the land around our main settlements is optioned up by developers, as in they effectively work on long-term timelines. So some of them will have, you know, a 30-year promotional agreement for a piece of land, etc. There will be exceptions. Don't get me wrong. Some landowners do promote their own land rather than sign agreements with developers, but the development into the housing industry is very proactive in signing options on land, and that's not just here, that's everywhere. This is how the system works. In terms of secondary schools, yes, we can plan into our developments a secondary school in the same way that Arborfield had a new secondary school within its strategic location, and indeed primary schools in all of our strategic locations. In terms of the land that's being promoted to us, the only one that's probably of substantive enough scale to provide a secondary school is the Hall Farm site. And it would be a central aspect, should that option be maintained, to ensure that community is as self-contained as possible. But certainly something of that scale would need to deliver a secondary school as part of it, as well as a number of primary schools, I should add. The other options we've got available are not of sufficient scale or location where on-site provision would be suitable. So you would have to provide an increase in school places elsewhere, which will be a challenge, as you refer. And in terms of the water and sewage, I can go further and say all utilities are being looked at through technical studies to ensure there is sufficient capacity in place now, or there is the possibility or capability of putting that capacity in place for when it is required. In terms of water, we do a water cycle study, which utilities and the Environment Agency are part of, which looks precisely at the capacity of water supply and the capacity of the sewage treatment works. And the idea is to make sure the utility companies know what needs to be improved when, and if there is a particular constraint in any part of the borough, it says improvement can't be made to a particular point in time, then we can make sure developments are phased back to a sufficient point where that improvement can be put in place. Without a particular constraint in delivery, it's not possible to phase when developments come forwards. So that's estimated. But if there is a particular issue, that can be quite legitimately put in place and say development X can't happen until this particular facility is improved, and we expect that to be in, say, 2030 or something of that nature. So there is full engagement with utilities.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just say that that's good, but it doesn't quite answer the point that I think it's a new need to try and separate rainwater out from general sewage, and I'm just wondering if something new like that is being considered.
I believe it will be part of the drainage and infrastructure schemes for all the developments. So yes, so we'll be working with utility companies to make sure there's appropriate strategy on place. As you say, sewage treatment is an issue if rainwater does go into those systems. So the idea, as you say, would be to keep it separate, preferably through a natural response system such as a sustainable drainage system, rather than using a culvert and a tank.
Okay,
I'd just like to add on that. I think what we're trying to do is future-proof as best we can. And all the things that like you just mentioned there with the sewage and everything, within the working group, we're coming through and we're starting to deal with those individual areas. And I think it's good that you've raised a particular point, and we need to, as time goes by, if we've got something that we know that we want to make sure is in the local plan, we want to embed it into the local plan so that the developers who come along have got the things to follow along too. And that's why the Borough Design Guide, when we get to that point, will get updated to what we want for the future. And that is the crux. I just call it future proofing. Is the best way. It's covering all of those areas. We have to build properties now. Here we are in 2022, taking us through to early 2024 and potentially beyond.
Okay.
We don't know what it's going to be.
Thanks, Lindsay. David.
Yeah, I sit here with a certain degree of sort of weight on my shoulders as someone who stuck a small but not insignificant spoke in the last local plan, which was all the elections in May. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody to try and find the most rapid and best but rapid solution to this. And the thought of it going into a further year's delay as another round of consultation takes place fills me with horror. I applaud everyone's optimism, that's not the right word, everyone's efforts to get the government to change their mind and come to our rescue. But I fear the government's not really capable of rescuing itself, never mind us. If that is the case, we have to make some tough decisions. And today's trip was hugely valuable to me. I'm sure to the others who are on it, and very informative. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not that difficult. We've got 4 large sites, and we're probably going to have to build on one, certainly, possibly 2 of them. And how much more information we're going to need before we make those decisions, I don't know. But I come back to my first question of the session, which is the timeline. And can we do all possible to accelerate that decision-making timeline to enable us to actually move forward? I think that then another question for all members, that when we've got a solution, we've got a choice to make. Do we try and sell it or do we try and sabotage it?
Okay. Very quickly.
So just very quickly on the timeline, I didn't touch on the technical work, which was mentioned. I should say the team are undertaking a very significant amount of technical work to support those decisions by members which are coming up. So we do have sustainability appraisal advice on board, and in terms of the habitat regulations, we do have the water cycle study work, the flood risk work, the highway modelling, the air quality modelling, etc. So all that technical work is being paralleled with the working group making themselves more familiar with sites. So as soon as we've gone through this process, officers will be in a position to make a technical recommendation to members to take it forwards. So I don't want to give the impression that we're waiting for that discussion for then the test and challenge to happen. That testing of options is being undertaken now, and we will only have to update that work if members make the decision to ask us to look at an option we have not tested. So we are trying to, at a technical level, make sure all the information is available to allow the earliest possible decision.
I just wanted to return very briefly to Anne's point about whether developers are promoting land, all the land in the borough. Well, there's hardly a blade of grass there isn't an option on. And the reason we are in this predicament is our proximity to London. In essence, our proximity to London has prices high, even in the context of 15% growth in population. Most developers will tell us, build more houses, that will bring the price down. In reality, building more houses has made no difference whatsoever to the price, which again reinforces the point about needing to try and address this critical shortage of affordable and social housing.
Okay, thank you. Norman.
I have a couple of points, and I think both have been partly dealt with. The first one quite substantially, but Ian, you say you're going through the technical appraisal, and then the next step will be to make your recommendation effectively to the politicians. When do you think you're going to be in a position to do that? I mean, even roughly. It's the first question. Excuse me.
I would hope to be able to support conversations at the first stage of conversation, certainly before Christmas, in that we're going through this exercise with members now in terms of familiarity and meeting landowners. And we've got our sustainability appraisal expert attending as well. That would feed into that initial conversation. The technical testing of evidence base would continue into next year, simply because of the time required to do the transport modelling, etc. So in terms of making a recommendation informally to a council meeting. Unfortunately, it probably fall within PERDA next year, which complicates matters. But the technical evidence, I suspect, which is going now, will probably continue on into the early spring of next year and support a decision at the earliest opportune time that our processes and constitution allow.
My second point is around the perception of need and the number of houses that we're required to deliver. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but really effectively that number just dictates how we calculate the 5-year land supply. And what effect does it have on the approvals that we make for planning applications, either with or without a plan? And it doesn't really then affect what the developers actually deliver. So, I mean, we've seen huge over delivery in the last few years. So if they perceive need to be different from what our numbers are, i.e. they're selling houses, then they'll just carry on, presumably.
I may have interpreted this wrong, so please feel free to correct me. But in terms of the local housing need, in terms of existing planning permission, if the figures change, it makes no difference to those individual permissions. It makes a difference as to how we count the sufficiency of supply of permissions, and that may influence future. So there's not an impact on something that has been granted now, but it will impact on what we can count effectively towards our future supply. What the local housing need does is set the minimum figure that we would need to deal with through the local plan. So clearly, if that figure was to go down, it makes the land challenge slightly less significant, albeit there will always be a challenge of finding land in Wokingham Borough. And if it was to go up, obviously it would increase that. So the local housing need primarily has two purposes. One is it informs the minimum number of homes that your plan is meant to enable. And secondly, it informs where your plan is older, how you calculate that housing land supply and whether the tilted balance is engaged. So it has very specifically those two purposes.
And how would that perception of need, the housing numbers, how would that play if there was no plan in place, as opposed to you would just describe the situation with a plan?
The interesting thing on the government's standard method and how it plays out is it resets each year. So in essence, if an authority is undersupplying, its undersupply gets wiped out and the figure continues as of a new base date. Unfortunately, it also works for oversupply, which is our particular issue. In terms of sort of need and developers' views on it, most of them will simply wish us to apply the national planning system. We will no doubt get pressure to go above the standard method and local housing need, in that a number of our developer friends would suggest that housing need is actually substantially higher because of the affordability of homes, or you wish to deliver more affordable homes, or indeed to support economic growth. And we will need to consider that through the system. But the government system says the starting point is the local housing need at present, and there would have to be very good reasons to move away from that. At the moment, our technical assessment of the local housing need and economic alignment is it's broadly works. So we don't believe there's a reason to go higher than the local housing need. Unfortunately, in terms of the system set up, yes, it's very difficult to move away from that in a downward direction. I'm sure if we wish to go higher, the national policy says quite clearly that's absolutely fine, but it is seen as a minimum.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, I do have a couple of questions. One is really about the design guide. One of the things I've noticed, and this is just a big pointer, please don't put a road between the houses and a school. I have that issue, and I know there's another estate that has that issue. Please, please, please do not do that. The other aspect is really, again, timescales. And I realise what you said about timescales, and I'm just wondering with this committee whether it's worth you coming back to give us an update in 6 months' time to say where you are with it. Does that sound agreeable with this committee? And is that agreeable with? Yeah, you're happy with that? Okay. The other thing that I'm concerned about is while you're having meetings with developers, I know this is a very contentious issue with residents, is actually getting in the face of residents. I know that is going to be awkward, contentious, but I know an online survey, it's 5.6% of people have responded out of 70,000 people. So that's pretty pathetic, quite frankly. So I'd like us to sort of get in front of people. I don't know whether that's something that is possible. Yeah. So it's a low percentage return, to be honest, which to me, which then from making business decisions is insignificant. So yeah. And I know in the previous consultation there were town hall visits, go and talk to them, and I know, but now we do have groups that are being formed in opposition to the plans. Actually go and speak to them, make them understand what the issues are. It's pointed question-ish.
So we had a fantastic communication, or and Stephen already mentioned this, around all the different poverty aspects, and it was really amazing. Why don't we have one about the plan? Because people are always asking questions about the plan and the planning permission and borough guidelines. Why can't we have such a quality WBC communication as that one, but about the plan? Because that was a great communication.
These are very good points, which we will have to consider. But I
take that as a yes.
I do think, yes, I would take it as an ambiguous answer. I'd take it as an ambiguous answer. But what I do think it's important to say is we have to be at the point where we can present options to people. We can actually demonstrate what the case for a particular development might be, or the location of a particular development site in the plan might be. We're not yet at that stage, so we can't. There's no point in going to go out to bat for a site that may not appear in the local plan.
I think really what I'm looking for is the communication plan to engage with those residents who are actually standing up and making objections, and actually engage with them early and often, as opposed to too late.
It is important to recognise there is a process we have to go through here. We've mentioned developers repeatedly. Developers are a very significant part of this process, in the sense that if a developer senses that a decision is being made on anything other than sound planning grounds, they will then raise this at the inspection in public. When we've got a final plan, that's not the end of the process. It then goes to the inspection in public. All of the interested parties, including all those developers who didn't get their sites in the local plan, are then able to make their case again to the inspector. So the developers are there looming around the edge, looking for us to conduct ourselves in a way that suggests we've not conducted the plan process properly. So we have to go with incredible care. And what we might want to say to residents has to be gauged by what it's possible to say in that context. That's a really important point, actually.
Yep, I totally get that. But my underlying thing is communication plan. What you say in it, so for that point you say we have to tread carefully and so forth, that's a perfectly valid point. Residents don't know that. I did not know that. So let people know. Yes, I think that's it, actually. Thank you.
I don't think anybody was suggesting that we put into communications it must be X rather than Y. That wasn't the idea. I think it was, raising that we're in a process that, difficult decisions have to be made. I mean, also ambitions to update the guide, update, climate emergency aspects, things that can be effectively communicated. That's what we're asking for, I think.
Those are very good points.
Okay, so I'm going to call that session to an end. So thank you for your time for this evening. We've
also stopped through the work program.
Yeah, we've still got a few things to go. So Adrian, you haven't finished yet.
I'll be very, 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 very brief. Meeting on the 26th of October. That is the first substantive MTFP item. That will be looking at, I believe, the place and growth directorate. If I can make a plea for the following two meetings, you've got on both the 3rd and the 29th of November, two relatively substantive items in addition to the MTFP. My suggestion, Chair, is going to be for officers to make very, very short presentations for both the domestic abuse, violence against women and girls, bus service and LC whip. Members take it as read that the papers are there, they're published long in advance, and to try and limit items that aren't MTFP to a combined total of just over maybe about an hour and 20 minutes. I wouldn't feel comfortable with the MTFP items having much less than sort of 2.5 hours if we move into a past 10:30 session.
Yep.
And that's it really.
I would agree. I think if we timetable the other items and yeah.
Pauline?
I think you might struggle on the meeting of the 29th of November where you've got a couple of pretty contentious items, the bus service update and the LC whip update, as well as the MTFP item. I've got a feeling that's going to be difficult to timetable. The other one, I think you probably could.
So, yeah, I agree. I think they're both very topical issues. What I would say is if we limit them to, as Norman suggested, sort of an hour and 20, an hour and a half, and see where we get to. And if there are, further actions to come out of that, then I think we deal with that as and when they come. Looking at, for example, there's a meeting in January where we don't have anything other than the MTFP scheduled for the moment. That could be a fallback for any mop-up business actions. It could give officers time to go away and actually do a bit more research on particular points that members want to look at. So that could actually work.
Like
decent reports in advance, so no need for a PowerPoint. We can just formulate questions, ask questions, and hopefully rattle through it quite quickly.
Yeah. Okay, we'll call that close then. So thank you for your time this evening. I know it's a long one. Cheers.